Matt go? I don't know the code. Get locked. I don't know what the code is.
Ready? Okay. Good evening, all. It's now approximately 7 o'clock. This is the Town of Warren Zoning Board of Review meeting for the month of March. I am the chair, Andrew Ellis. To my right is Jason Raynone, Jason Nystrom, Michael Elves, who is usually an alternate, but will be sitting as a voting member this evening because one of our regular members is excused. Barrett Holby, the vice chair, and David Francis, the second alternate. Mr. Francis, as the alternate, will be participating and will be available should any matters be continued to the future, or should a member need to recuse themselves, then he would become a voting member. So we do have a quorum in order to proceed this evening. The first matter is the approval of minutes from February 15th. Those minutes were circulated. Is there any discussion or is there a motion on the minutes?
I'll move approval of the minutes as circulated.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Right, the minutes are approved. The first matter under old business application 2301 Carl Sen, owner and applicant, 1 Twisted Road, plat 16, lot 27. Dimensional variance to allow a single family residence to be constructed with less than allowed side and front yard setbacks in the R40. The applicant has communicated to staff. They're not ready to proceed with this, so they are requesting a continuance to the April meeting. Is there a motion to that effect?
Make a motion to continue application 23-1 for the April meeting.
Second it.
Okay, very good. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so that application is now continued. Second matter under old business, application 2304, Thomas and Sandra Marston, owner and applicant, 58 Shore Drive, plat 17, lot 51, request for a dimensional variance under 3277 to construct an addition to the residence with less than the allowable front and rear setback and more than the allowable lot coverage in the residential village overlay zoning district. I will note that at 5:30 this evening, a public site visit was conducted at the subject property so that the board and members of the public could view the proposed extents of this addition. If the applicant would like to come forward, please. And again, if you could just identify your name and address for the record.
Mr. Chairman, I have to recuse myself on that one.
Okay, thank you.
Were you going to change any of the other items around?
No, I've decided we're proceeding with the rest of it. Okay. Okay, and we'll just note that Mr. Francis is now a voting member of the board. So, you could just give us a brief description of, again, what the project proposal was. And we had discussion on this at the last meeting, just had a site visit. Just recap that for us.
The proposal is to add a bedroom, house, to be a second bedroom. And add a gap in front of the house. And cover over the entry of stuff.
And the reason you're seeking relief is because the additions would both increase the lot coverage beyond what is allowable by the ordinance, and it would also be within the setbacks that are prescribed. And I believe it was your previous testimony that the placement of the additions, in particular the bedroom, was to respect a view corridor from your neighbor up the hill. to be the least intrusive as possible.
That's correct.
Board have any specific questions for the applicant for the application or relating to the site visit?
No, I just want to thank the applicants for staking everything out so nicely for us this evening. It was very helpful.
Okay. Is there anyone in the public who would like to offer any commentary on this application? Okay, no. We will note that other individuals were present at the site visit and stated that it was favorable to them, and there was a statement that the neighbor up the hill was unavailable due to travel, but was also not opposed to the application. Is that accurate to your understanding?
That is correct.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about this proposal? Are there any final questions or discussion from the board? If not, someone prepared with a motion on this application?
You want to take this one, Dave? You want to take
I don't know who was supposed to do this one.
it? Probably me.
All right, we were going to do the other one, so perhaps Mr. Nystrom.
I can.
All right, I can do it.
All right. No.
This is Mr. Nystrom. I move approval of application number 23-04, Thomas and Sandra Marston, owner and applicant. 58 Shore Drive, plat map 17, lot 51. Request for a dimensional variance under section 32-77 to construct an addition to the residence with less the allowable front and rear setback and more than the allowable lot coverage in the residential village overlay zoning district. In granting this petition, we find that the hardship is due to the unique characteristics of the subject land or structure and not to the general characteristics of the surrounding area, and are not due to the physical or economic disability of the applicant. Again, there's some extensive testimony taken at the last meeting as well as the site visit today that made it very clear that this part of town in the Twisted area is quite hilly. It's a steep hill, it's an old neighborhood where the houses are relatively close together. If you're going to do any sort of expansion, you're going to be running into the house likely is already non-conforming to some degree anyway. We find that the hardship is not the result of any prior action of the applicant and does not result from the primarily from the desire to yield greater financial gain. Again, there's been some testimony taken that the core structure of this home is one of the original, if not the original structure to this neighborhood. And it is the applicant's desire in completing this renovation and addition project to remain there to be able to live in this area with some additional living space. The granting of the variance will not alter the general character of the surrounding area, and the request conforms to the purposes and intent of the Warren zoning ordinance and comprehensive plan. Again, owing in good part to the site visit, we were able to take a look at this property, some of the neighboring properties, and the scope of the project that the applicants wish to contain. The end result is certainly something in line with the other properties we see in the area. And we find that the relief requested is the least relief necessary. Again, this goes back to the unique situation of the land, of the property. The house is essentially, it is a corner lot on Shore Drive and Prospect Avenue. And while the address of this home is on Shore Drive, it's about an 18-foot steep hill that goes from the existing house down to the road. Going to the north and south of the property, I believe on the north, you've got the septic system, and the south, you have the well head, which essentially constrains any sort of renovation project to going east to west. We find that this is the least relief necessary. The applicants have been very clear in the desire to wanting to keep this property renovation in line with the other homes in the area, and specifically are very cognizant of the water views and sight lines for their neighbor behind them, and wanting to construct a one-story addition to make sure that their neighbor's views will not be impeded by this project. And if this variance were not to be granted, we find that it would be more than a mere inconvenience. Again, the way the house is situated right now, there is only one proper means of egress, which is the rear of the property. as well as some other things, it is getting a little tight for the current situation. And at the last hearing, as well as at the site visit today, it was made very clear exactly why these new dimensions were required and necessary. To memorialize the dimensional requirements and variances sought, the variances, minimum lot frontage. I take it back. Minimum front yard setback 25 is required. Existing is 14 feet 7 inches, and the proposed is 8 feet 7 inches for the front deck. The rear yard setback, what is required is 35 feet. What is existing currently is 1 foot 1 inch, and what is proposed is 8 inches with the new construction. The minimum side yard setback, what is required is 50. Yep, forgive me, move on. And regarding the maximum building lot coverage, what is required is 20%, what is currently existing is 23%, and the proposed would be 30%.
Okay, are there any other conditions or amendments to that motion? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So the motion is passed unanimously. Good luck with your project. Hopefully it's very successful.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next matter, now we're moving on to new business. Application 2307, Paul Bullock, owner, and Katie Dixon, applicant, 277 Water Street, plat 4, lot 95. Requesting a special use permit to allow a cafe retail space under 3253 in the waterfront zoning district. Communication with the town solicitor has occurred, determining that this application would also need a variance. So the applicant has requested to continue this to the April meeting as well. So is there a motion to continue this matter?
Make a motion to continue.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so this matter is now continued to the April meeting. Next, under new business, we have application 2308, Lee High owner and Christine Francis applicant, 18 Child Street, plat map 4, lot 30, request for a sign permit to install an exterior sign and window signage under 32115 in the Village Business Zoning District. And I will just note that Mr. Holby has returned to his seat. So Mr. Francis will be in the alternate position again. Yes. If you'd like to come up and identify yourself, name and address, please.
My name is Christine Francis. I am the owner of the business calling to this location. The business address is 18 Child Street. I'm in the process of relocating right now from Sheridan Four Corners, and I will be living at 351 Child Street, apartment 2.
Okay.
We can have.
Okay, so just give us a brief explanation of the sign that you're, or the signs that you're requesting, and why you believe you need these signs to identify the business.
Blade sign,
Mhm.
double-sided circular blade sign, that's my logo. It's a metal sign. It exists because I use it in my farm location. It requires the variance because it extends more than 6 inches beyond the front of the building. I put into my application a sign holder that I plan to use, which is 40 inches. The sign will be installed at the bottom or the 9 feet above grade. The square footage of that particular sign is just under 15 square feet, which is the limit for that area. But I do also wish to add some window signage, which would be consistent of my logo repeated with some linear graphics. I put in a little bit of that, and that would probably be front surface if I can find something that will fade the window. I'll be putting window, like UV protection on the inside of the window, so you have to decide if I want to go on the inside of that or on the that.
All right, I would just note that the agenda says you're applying for a sign permit, but you're applying for a sign variance. You are a dimensional variance for the sign. I think that's reasonably understandable.
Correct. I agree. 14 square feet roughly that's noted in the application, is that including both sides of the sign?
Yes.
And so how much is the total signage, including the window and the blade sign?
I think one question in that regard would be looking at the mock-up that you had included in your application. There are 2 medallions in that window treatment that I would consider signage. I'm not necessarily sure that the decorative horizontal line treatment would qualify as signage.
Well, the way they're, whatever the requirements are defined, I can't remember the term for it. It said to sort of draw a block around the area where that will go. I mean, so that's where I came up with 23 square feet. But yes, the medallions which are my logo would only be a small part of that. It probably won't be about a 12-inch diameter window.
I think we've made findings in the past that colorful lines did not constitute signage. Such as the taco place. I don't think they've ever installed the colorful lines.
No, but there's a lot of discussion about that. Yeah.
Yes, I think we determined that because the colorful lines aren't necessarily like a logo or something unique to your business, it's not telling about the business, it's just,
That complement to the branding.
so I think unless there's any objections, we can simply count the circular logo itself as the actual sign that's going on the window, and there's 2 of those.
I think for those would be about square.
Well, they're roughly 1 foot in diameter.
If I, yeah, I mean, I can do them any size. I want them big enough that they're readable, but not so big that they block people's view of this side of the window.
Making the math easy, if we call them a foot in diameter, we'd be talking 3.5 square feet in area per.
Something.
So if we call it an additional 7 square feet of signage for the windows. Okay.
And that gives you a little flexibility if you go 12-inch or 14-inch or whatever sort of diameter might work well there. And so is it your feeling that the size and orientation of these signs would be necessary due to the location of the building, that it would allow people on Main Street, both vehicle and traffic, to clearly identify your business?
Yes, the blade sign being readable from the side is actually helpful to me in that location because people on Main Street will see it. I do also plan to light the sign, and I do know that the lighting is allowed when I'm open and not when I'm closed. So my intention would be to have it lighted and open, if it's dark.
Have you discussed with your landlord exactly how high that light can be mounted on the building?
Yes, the lights will go on the fascia that's on the exterior of the building. So you can sort of see in the drawing, I said, the purple on the fascia, and they'll be wired through my space, and I have permission to mount the bracket up on the outside of the second floor.
I think my only concern with sort of the apparent angle of the light that you're showing in the mock-up is I worry about what I'm assuming is the living room window of the person on the second floor.
Yeah, I purchased 18-inch stems so that they'll be directly in the middle of the sign itself.
Mhm.
And I want to keep them at an angle that they will have the least sort of overlap as possible.
Gotcha.
Those tenants are also my landlord's tenants, so if there's any issue, I can always adjust that if they have issues, but my goal is to have as minimal overage as possible, none towards the street and as little as possible.
Sure. I think one of the things that I might throw in as a condition for that is usually these types of lights can have what's called a louver in it. It's just a shielding mechanism that sits in front of the lamp that allows for any of the glare that would normally shine sideways, either out into the street or up into neighboring apartments. It'll just cut that down and make sure that the lighting is. It wouldn't surprise me. I wasn't able to find it on the drawings, but it would not surprise me if it was there.
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay, so I look at that and it's shining up a little bit. I would have it shining more down and up into someone's apartment.
That was my other concern and that was why I was asking whether or not
Yeah.
the location for that's been pinned yet, it may be better to have it slightly above center, so the light itself is actually aimed down towards the sidewalk slightly. And that would keep any of the stray light from going up into other windows in the surrounding area.
Just don't want to end up in traffic. It's such a busy intersection nearby, so it's trying to keep it as straight on as possible.
Understood. And there's probably some limitations in where that can go, because I'm sure your landlord doesn't want to be penetrating a brick wall.
Of that fascia, then I'm in, going through brick
Mhm.
from the residential apartment rather than from the other two. But I can do it up as high as I can. Definitely be mindful of the installation of that.
Yep, I think that makes sense.
And is there one light on each side of the sign?
Yes.
And just to make sure we have the right dimensions, the ordinance required, what, 6 inches off the face of the building? So how far are we in fact
The
going?
sign is 36 inches and the bracket is 40, so the sign would be about 38 inches off. I don't need to count the bracket or the sign itself, but.
Is
I need
it
to
6
hold it
inches
off
to the
slightly.
sign?
No, I'll keep it as close as I can to the building. Just to see how long-
Yeah, we're just look at that for a moment to clarify if the ordinance is 6 inches between the face of the building and the edge of the sign, because for a blade sign, it doesn't make much sense that the sign itself would be 6 inches.
It says.
Yeah, what does it say?
Shall not be set off truck and 6 inches. Projected in that.
That's horribly vague, but yeah.
I'm sorry, that is
Shall not be set more than 6 inches off.
correct. Shall not be set off truck and 6 inches.
So does that mean to the starting edge of the sign?
Not really.
Interpretation.
Well, I mean, and in that specifically to a blade sign, is that what is the
There's
category?
really not a lot of blades in it, but for zoning,
Oh, because I can see like a wall mounted sign, yes, it'd be reasonable that doesn't stick more than 6
but
inches.
there's no mention of blade signs. There's really no allowance for them, so as far as I can see.
I mean, I know
apply for a variance
we-
requirement.
We have them at other locations.
They're very consistent with what's around town.
Yeah, signs suspended over public sidewalks shall have a height to the bottom of the sign no less than 9 feet.
Is that being met?
Yes.
Can't believe there's nothing about a sign perpendicular to the face of the building.
Would you consider that a projecting sign?
Oh,
That would
yeah.
be a projecting.
Where is
sign.
the section on that?
Page 68. On the box.
There we go. Not more than 6 inches, plastic signs prohibited.
Well, yeah,
Yep.
that's.
Not be set off the structure. Well, I think that could mean that it's the first edge of the sign is not more than 6 inches off the structure. Not that the whole sign,
Sorry, by definition, sign mounted perpendicular to the building surface.
okay, so that's gotta mean the distance from the building to the start of the sign, because there's no way you would have a perpendicular sign limited to 6 inches. This doesn't make sense. So what would be the dimension from the face of the brick to the edge of the circle?
One thing, I won't know for sure until I get up there. It will be as little as 2 inches, and if I need to add blocking, it could be up to maybe 4 inches. My only issue is visibility from Main Street, and you can see in the picture, there is that bump out, so it's just a matter of me getting it down as low as I can, so it's just above 9 feet. But I want to make sure it's visible from Main Street, so it'll probably be 2 to 4 inches.
So it would be within 6 inches at the most. All right, so I think we can memorialize that. That's our finding, that you would be within 6 inches of the face of the fascia or the brick or whatever of the building, which is fine. And then just the size of your total signage would be in excess of what's allowable. Does anyone else have any other questions at this time before we go to public comment? Is anyone in the public wishing to offer any comments on this sign application? Nope. Is there any other information you'd like to share about your business or the need for this sign?
I just think it's in keeping with the other signs that are around town, and it's in keeping with the signs that would have been in this town, 200 years ago. So to me, it makes sense.
I'm sorry, what was the nature of the business?
I sell retail vintage.
Okay,
What does that mean, retail
Is this
vintage clothes?
So
Or
a lot of different items, but they are all.
Harmon and
vintage.
Ginger.
I do have some new
Vintage
items.
goods.
does that mean antiques or does that mean,
Depends on how you want to define it. So
okay,
most of my items are about 40 years old or older. Different people define vintage differently. I wouldn't say it's antique because it doesn't really qualify as antique. I have a very sort of more boutique style than some other stores in the neighborhood who I'm very good friends with proprietors, but I do still find that it's a different way of presenting things, and I've been in business in Rhode Island for over 10 years. I was in the city for 6.5 years, and then I was in Four Corners for the past.
So your business currently operates in Tiverton, Four Corners, and it was in Providence before that,
Yes.
and same kind of thing,
Same
vintage.
exact concept, yeah.
So it has a track record of being a successful business.
Yes, I only left the arcade because my landlord wanted to sell units.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Any other questions about this application? Has someone prepared with a motion?
I'll take it. Give us a shot. Okay, make a motion on application number 23-08, Lee Hale. Owner and Christine Francis. Applicant, 18 Child Street, plat map 4, lot 30, requesting for a sign permit to install an exterior sign and window signs under section 32-115 in the Village Business District. In granting this, the hardship of the unique, the characteristic of the subject structure, being that fascia board that comes down to a certain level, and you can't go above it or below it. We will put that, and the sign's gonna be 9 feet up, memorialized, it's gonna be above the zoning restriction. It's gonna be above where the zoning would allow, so that would be okay. The hardship is we're also gonna memorialize the up to 6 inches. So if you stay within that 6 inches, you'll stay within the zoning permission of that as well for the permit. The hardship is not the result of a prior action of the applicant. They're moving in and they're putting in a new sign. The granting of this variance will not alter the general characteristic of the surrounding areas. It falls in line with the village district of the signs that are in the area. The relief requested is the least relief necessary, especially because 2 of them are already within the zoning dimensionals. And I believe we should grant it due to those circumstances.
So, and did we have
Yep.
more than a mere hardship?
More than mere inconvenience.
Or mere inconvenience?
It would be more than a mere convenience to make that sign smaller because of the visibility of the business, knowing, visualize from that very high traffic area.
Are there any conditions or amendments?
I wanted to make sure that
About the lighting, yeah.
the wand there is downward lighting, not going up, but down. I think you can just change that wand the opposite way. Just have the wand go up.
Put
and
the
let it
lighting a
go
little
down.
higher so that you can put it in each centered or downward. So it's not not impeding the apartment.
Yep.
And
So-
then there's something about a screen in it.
Yeah, so we will condition this that the light fixture itself needs to have an internal louver or other glare shielding device that will protect any of the surrounding apartments or the roadway below. That light fixture should be mounted as high as practical, and that's a discussion to have with your landlord. And we will also codify in the approval that this is an approval for up to 22 square feet of signage.
Including the windows.
Including the window sign, 15 square feet, double-sided for the hanging sign and 7 square feet worth of window signage.
Including the the logo text piece only, that we're not considering the decorative lines as part of the signage, just so we have that on the record. Other amendments, conditions? Is there a second?
I'll second it. Jake now.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so the variance is passed. Hope you'll have all success when you relocate. Thank you.
Good luck.
All right, so next, we're gonna need a motion to combine matters 3, 4, and 5, all pertaining to Toasted Bun Holdings, doing business as Chomp Kitchen and Drinks, so that we may hear the testimony pertaining to these 3 matters together, but we will have 3 individual decisions
So moved.
on this matter. All
I
right.
can make a motion for,
So just moved it.
So moved.
You're seconding it, Barrett?
sure.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so application 2309, 2310, and 2311 are going to be combined for the purposes of testimony. So 2309 is Toasted Bun Holdings LLC owner and Sam Glenn, DBA Chomp Kitchen Drinks and applicant. 279 Water Street, plat 4, lot 96. This is a request for a parking variance to allow less than the required on-site off-street parking spaces under 32105 and to allow a shared parking agreement under 32151E3 in the waterfront zoning district. 3210, same entity, same location. They're requesting an amendment to the decision of this board dated May 25th, 2021, allowing the dumpster to be relocated to an area that is operationally functional in the waterfront district. And 2311, again, same entity, same address. They would also like an amendment to the decision dated November 7th, 2021. Like to change the hours of operation to allow for a shared parking plan with the other businesses on the property in the waterfront zoning district. Good evening. If you'd like to identify yourself for the record.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mike Perez, make on behalf of the owners and applicants. I'd also like to know that I'm joined here this evening by the owner of the property, Mr. Glenn, as well as our parking and traffic expert, Mr. Bannon, who will be offering some testimony tonight relative to the relief that is being sought. Thank you, Matt. So again, this is 279 Water Street, plot 4, lot 96. The property contains 3 separate buildings with 3 separate tenancies. As you noted, there was an original zoning decision which was passed. It was passed unanimously 5-0 on May 26, 2021. So I can tell you that board members, you know, there is a lot of paperwork that has been filed in connection with these 3 applications so as to comply with all the checklist items. But I'd like to go over a genesis, quite frankly, of why we are back before the board at this time. And there's generally 2 reasons that we're back before this board. So Mr. Glenn understood incorrectly, albeit, that he would be able to rely on shared parking for these 3 tenancies without the need to go to planning and without the need to present before this zoning board for a variance. That's not correct. It's not what your ordinance states. So based on that misconception, he constructed a patio, a stone patio, which resulted in what we believed at first to be a 6-spot deficiency, meaning a deficiency was created because of the elimination of those spots when the patio was constructed. After we retained Mr. Bannon, we actually identified that there was a 8 parking spot deficiency. So we're here this evening. One of the applications is relative to relying on shared parking to obviate that 8-spot deficiency. So that's the first reason why we're back before this board this evening.
And but just before we get off the parking description, is it correct to state that the intent is still, per the original approval, 60 seats inside and 20 seasonal seats outside?
That is absolutely correct. And I want to make very clear that we are not seeking to modify the decision with respect to seating in any way. And we're only seeking to modify the decision based on the relief that's been expressly stated. So that is correct, Mr. Ellis.
And so it is only to change the physical location of the parking spaces. We're not changing capacity. We're not affecting that in any way. You're just proposing an alternative layout both on the site and at remote locations for the park.
You stated it very succinctly, very correct.
Okay, let's proceed.
As to the second reason we're before this board, and the board may be aware that after the zoning decision was issued, an appeal was taken in the Superior Court by an abutter, Mr. Bullock, who was actually on the agenda this evening, and it was actually that very property that the appeal flowed from. So we resolved that case. We entered into a settlement agreement with Mr. Bullock, which resulted in a modified easement agreement that's been recorded in the land evidence records, as well as a settlement agreement that memorializes the parties' obligations. Now, one of his major concerns was the location of the dumpster. So the reason that we are here this evening seeking a modification of the location of the dumpster, which was a condition to the original zoning approval decision, is because we moved it to satisfy Mr. Bullock and to obviate his concerns as to the location. So those are the two main reasons that we are before you this evening. Now, I do want to let the board, I want to make the board aware that we were before the planning board because this is in a waterfront overlay district. We required their approval and recommendation relative to all three of these applications. And I'm pleased to state, as it relates to the shared parking variance, we received a 4-1 vote. As it relates to the wedge modification, we've received a 5-0 vote. And as it relates to the dumpster relocation, it was a 5-0 vote, all in favor of these approvals. Now, we also, albeit it was just on Monday, so we got some recommendations from the planning board. We also conferred with staff, and we have made some very small modifications to the shared parking plan, which will be discussed by Mr. Bannon at length. And it is simply shifting 2 of the spots slightly to obviate concerns of Mr. Bullock and issues that were raised relative to their locations. So it's just a minor change, and we'll be getting to it shortly.
So what is the agreed upon width of the easement in favor of Mr. Bullock?
So the easement itself, if we look at the recorded easement as well as the settlement agreement, the easement, which is only for pedestrian ingress and egress, obviously part of that easement is a stairway. So we're not talking about vehicles or anything like that. The easement itself on the plans is 20 feet wide. But if you look at the settlement agreement and the easement agreement, there is shading, and you should have a colored copy. And there's a pink area, and
I
there's
don't think the other board members have seen.
Yeah,
it.
we need a copy.
Yeah,
of
I
the
put that on.
dumpster and,
Thank you.
So I had questions about that.
there's
because
nothing
the
for it in
text-
hand?
Is it in this right here?
No, it's not. No. The text of, the written text of the easement references 20 feet. Right?
That's
But
correct.
Then there's notations made about a pink shaded area. And it also states that no parking can occur within the easement, which if it's the 20 feet, then it's problematic. If it's the pink area, then it might be okay.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up, and Mr. Bannon's also going to address that. But this easement was a pre-existing easement. We entered into an agreement to revise it and to memorialize it in a more clear manner. And so I forgot I have to stay at my mic. So I think, oh, thank you. So
You're right here. We can hear you. Thank you.
historically speaking, what we did was we modified this because it was a very ambiguous type easement. In fact, it was essentially ancient history, very difficult to decipher exactly what the rights were. But
It
what
was
I
an
can,
electrical easement, was it not, that there were utilities underground, that was the original intent?
correct, but it also was used for ingress and egress between these lots. And so ultimately, this easement has historically had parking spaces in it that were even connected to Mr. Bullock's property's use. The agreement is that the pink area will have no parking whatsoever, no dumpster whatsoever. And as you can see, based on that agreement, we've preserved plenty of room for foot pedestrian ingress and egress, because normally when you look at easements that are solely relegated for that reason, 10 feet is sufficient. It's certainly not sufficient if you're dealing with vehicles. And so based on the agreement that we entered into, there can be no spots within the pink area. There can be no dumpster within that area. However, we are able to locate spots within that other aspect of the easement that is not shaded, is not in pink, and is not in yellow. Because as you look at the settlement agreement and the easement agreement, there are certain obligations that connect to the yellow shading and the pink with respect to maintenance and the like. And the agreement specifically explains that you cannot have any parking or dumpster location in that pink area, because that was Mr. Bullock's primary concern. So we believe through this agreement, we've effectuated a situation where ingress and egress is perfectly appropriate for pedestrian access. We've mollified or obviated his concerns, and we are utilizing that 10-foot area for some parking spots. But again, it's not going to interrupt ingress or egress or any pedestrian activity.
So what is that yellow?
I want to just ask the solicitor, so does the attachment of this document to the easement provide legal basis to approve something happening within the stated width of the easement, which is 20 feet, which the written text says, and is contrary to what the actual written description says can or cannot happen in the easement?
I would actually ask the applicant attorney to explain exactly if there's a conflict within the description and also the language, what's the reasoning, the legal reasoning for it.
There's no conflict. It's expressly stated in the easement that the pink area, there'll be no permanent parking. And so the concept being that pursuant to the agreement and that other aspect of the easement, there can be parking spots.
Mr. Chair, and just to say that, so there was obviously an appeal. There was an agreement, a legal agreement between the parties. This is a binding agreement now that both parties have to follow.
And if I could just suggest to the board, the last thing that I'm looking to do this evening is to create a situation where I get an approval to put parking spots in a place where I'm violating a contractual obligation via settlement and via an easement agreement. So we feel very comfortable that this was the intent of the parties, that it is the clear language of the easement. And I would just state, while it is incredibly important to have an easement plan attached to an easement agreement, it has to be viewed together. The language of the actual instrument itself is extremely important. And this map has to be interpreted with respect to that language.
And you're comfortable that the construction of the dumpster area outside of the pink area, but still within the 20-foot identified easement meets the intent of what the parties agreed to?
Yes.
And that yellow area is for what now?
So the yellow area, and I'll give a quick summation, but we could go to the language of the agreement. There is a staircase that degraded on Mr. Bullock's property. So obviously, in order for him to utilize this easement, that staircase has to be rebuilt. That's one of his obligations. I believe Mr. Glenn, pursuant to the agreement, has an obligation to put a fence up or a gate. Is that correct? And so that yellow area, if we look at the agreement, is just outlining certain obligations as to who has maintenance obligations, who has obligations to make the improvements. And it even goes on to obligations that there be mutual insurance to cover that area for the benefit of both property owners. And obviously the gate has been put in place so that there's not a situation where people that shouldn't be using this are using it. It's meant for invitees of Mr. Bullock's and residents to be able to use that staircase in that area. And so we're putting a gate in it. We've got maintenance obligations. And, you know, the big thing with easement agreements in general, and one of the reasons why we did this is there was an easement agreement that really didn't talk about obligations of the parties. So for instance, and this is a little bit off base, but if you're going to go to a bank and you have an easement agreement on your property and you want to refinance or get a loan, the first thing they're going to say is, well, who maintains it? Who has the insurance on it? What are the obligations and rights of the parties as it relates to this? So we saw it as a way not only to obviate concerns, to establish how this area was going to be used, but a way that both property owners could proceed with a lot more specificity as to exactly what that easement is and what it entails.
So just so we're clear, the orange arrows that are going up and down in the corner, that's that yellow area that was in the plane you showed us before, the stairway?
Yes, that's correct.
And it's because the pink shaded area is the reason why the dumpster now has been shifted down to about halfway into the page, correct?
Correct.
All right. You may have answered this already. I've been trying to, I was spent a lot of time looking at the document we didn't already have, but have you or Mr. Glenn spoken with Mr. Bullock, and is he okay with all this?
Well, I can tell you that Mr. Glenn has attempted to reach out to Mr. Bullock. We have not heard back. We assume that he's viewed the application materials. I do believe that your zoning official may have had some discussions with Mr. Bullock. So if I may, I would defer to the zoning official.
And the only reason I ask is I understand what you're saying. Hey, we had this agreement, we worked this out. It's understanding this is going to be hunky dory. Given the history, that's why I just wanted to ask, has anyone actually spoken with him about this exact plan?
Well, I will tell you this, we have made.
What's the answer, Matt?
If I may. So Mr. Bullock visited me on Friday in my office. He expressed 3 concerns and he said he wasn't going to come tonight as long as these 3 concerns are met. He was fine with the project and the way it was going. One was parking. He didn't want any parking on the easement, which was stated basically it's a walking path. So that way the patrons can get from Water Street to that side door. He also said that it was met that so this easement is, if you can see, look at this diagram, there's an arrow that goes from the side door of the building, which isn't depicted on this diagram, but that arrow would go into a side door. So that way the patrons can come out, they can go through that gate. And then that little alcove there there's an arrow that would go to a set of stairs to get to the back. So that was Mr. Bullock's concerns, and as well as that the dumpster wasn't on the easement. I produced this diagram for him as well as many of the documents that we have here pertaining to the dumpster, and he was satisfied with that as long as the 3 stipulations that I just stated were met.
Okay.
Oh, we want to include this dumpster diagram should be included as exhibit A, perhaps. There's also the supplementary printed material that's in a larger format, identical to what was in the package, just at a larger scale.
It's actually, so some of it is, because when we went to planning the other evening, it was very tough to read. So the applicant went and had it printed to be clearer, but then there is some new documents that would reflect what the planning board requested, which is the movement of 2 parking spots.
So excuse me, I just wanted to make clear for the record, it's the proposed plan. Mr. Bandon's going to get into this in detail, but it's the proposed plan set that has the revision relative to the location of those two spots. And I believe that the only other item that's new in there is just simply a demonstrative, which I'm going to get to in a moment. We've secured some off-street parking, and we're just demonstrating to the board where those are and what the walking paths will be. And I do want to address that very briefly just before I hand it over to Mr. Bannon.
Okay, so we'll just document that dumpster diagram can be exhibit A, and the enlarged material plans here, I will just call that exhibit B. All right, so you want to just explain about that offsite parking.
Right, so just briefly, when Mr. Bannon gets up, he is going to be going over an existing conditions plan. He's going to go over proposed conditions plan. We'll go over all the parking requirements associated with each of these uses per your zoning ordinance. And to the extent the board has any questions about how this differs from the approved plan that's approved today, that was approved in May of last year, he's happy to discuss that and any distinctions. And then the final thing that I'll say before I hand it over to Mr. Bannon, excuse me for being verbose, but I think this is very important. After all this is filed, Mr. Glenn did the best that he could to attempt to find off-site parking. Your zoning ordinance allows for off-site parking to be considered in fulfilling zoning requirements if the property line to property line is 400 feet or less. So we've gone out and we've obtained 2 leases. Both of the properties are within that 400 foot threshold. One of the leases is for 8 spots. It's a 5-year base term with a 5-year option. I can tell you that if we could have got 20, we would have, but we're tethered to the party that we were negotiating with, and what we were able to get at this point is 10 years. There's another lease which provides 6 additional spots. We were only able to obtain a 6-month duration for that. And then after that, it's on a month-to-month because the property owner did not feel comfortable with an obligation over that period at this time. So what that means is there are 14 additional spots. We are still asking for all the relief that we're asking for this evening, but it's our position that based on us obtaining these spots, that we actually have cured the defect in the parking that was created by the construction of that patio. We lost 8, we've just gained 14. Now, I can tell you that as a condition to this board in granting this approval this evening, and I don't, not to be presumptuous, if we were to get this approval, we would be happy to agree to a condition that Mr. Glynn in good faith attempts to keep those leases in place during the duration of these businesses, so long as it's commercially reasonable. My concern is I don't want to hold Mr. Glynn to other parties, a third party. I certainly don't want to create a situation where somebody knows he needs these spots. We go to renegotiate them and it turns from a certain amount to $20,000 a spot. So the point is being, we secured everything that we could. And with that, I think I'm ready for Mr. Bannon.
So can I just ask, so in total, including the on-site and off-site, how many parking spaces are currently proposed with the leases you have in place?
I'm going to have Mr. Bannon handle that. He's the numbers guy.
Really quick before you step away, there is mention in 2309 of a modification to hours of operation. And that's a modification to a different special use permit, if I'm correct.
That's the wedge.
Correct.
That goes to the shared parking agreement in terms of timing peak times can't be the same. So in fact, we would have to amend that if the board is going to approve the variance for this shared parking plan.
Gotcha. So we're functionally approving modifications to 2 different special use permits.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, and just to be clear, that wedge modification, really all it's doing is limiting the hours from what was previously proposed and asking for permission just like Chomp, just like the cafe, to rely on the shared parking agreement.
It's a reduction in hours and a reduction in hours and a reduction of 1 or 2 days a week.
That's right. That's right. So it's, you know, that obviously that supports our reliance on the shared parking because of the different types of uses, disparity in peak hours, and as you just mentioned, even the days themselves have been narrowed.
Okay, so Mr. Bannon, is it? You want to identify yourself?
And it's just so the board is aware, we're not trying to take hours from Wedge, that they're agreeable. This is their existing hours. It's just, I believe when they went in for the special use permit originally, it was a little bit broader than what they actually needed for the business and what their intent was as far as hours and days. With that, Mr. Bannon, and Mr. Chairman, if you would just indulge me quickly, I would like Mr. Bannon to go over his education, his experience with respect to providing testimonies to boards in the state, so that I may ask the board to qualify him as a traffic and parking expert.
All right.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Paul Bannon. I'm a senior project manager associate with Beta Group in Lincoln, Rhode Island. Graduated from the University of Rhode Island with a Bachelor of Science in Civil and Environmental Engineering, and have been working in the transportation traffic engineering industry for the last 38 years. I specialize in doing work for communities, the Department of Transportation, designing highways, traffic signal systems, doing development projects and traffic studies, working for the State Traffic Commission, doing safety and roadway improvement projects. I've testified in over 38 communities in Rhode Island, in Massachusetts, and Superior Court, Rhode Island and Massachusetts as a traffic expert.
Based on that testimony, Mr. Chairman, board members, I would ask that Mr. Bannon be qualified as an expert.
I think we can accept that, but he's an expert in the subject matter.
Thank you. I'll just briefly go over, I don't know if you want to pull up the site plan.
Yeah, if you could give a brief synopsis and then just respond to specific questions.
When you want to start.
The existing conditions.
Is that this plan that we have?
That's not the plan.
Is that this?
Yes.
That's in the front here that says existing conditions plan? It's the first page of the larger scale.
Yes, that's the correct one.
This one.
Yeah, it has some spaces 3 through 6 are shown on a diagonal, sort of the northeast corner. I think that's what we're looking at.
Yeah. Yes, and if you look at the bottom corner of the plan, it should indicate existing conditions.
So prior to Mr. Glenn purchasing the property, this is how it existed. There were 18 available spaces on the the wharf property, and 6 parking spaces on his lot that for the 3 buildings that were there. And this is how they were configured. I got involved this past fall with the project because Mr. Glenn had got his approvals and started the renovations on the building. And during that renovation process, he realized and putting in his doors and expanding the building and figuring out how people were going to get in and out and how he was going to accommodate everything. He realized that the plan that was approved resulted in a concern relative to people accessing the building, waiting to be seated, where the parking that was previously approved had 6 spaces right at the front door. And it was not a good condition and would have resulted in a good condition. So he contacted the town and it was his understanding, as Mr. Resnick had previously indicated, that he could rely on parking, on the shared parking ordinance to rectify converting that front area to a more a safer, more friendly environment for his front door business. So in starting that renovation, he received the notice and regarding his to stop work on that. So that's where I got involved in working with him in identifying what was actually there, looking back at what the existing conditions were and how many spaces are presently available. So with the displacement of the 6 spaces in front, and then as discussed with the easement agreement, 2 spaces were lost there and with the dumpster relocation. So presently, there are 22 spaces available for the 3 businesses. The requirement is 30. That was previously provided and approved. So 8 spaces were displaced over this period.
So based on the occupancy of the cafe, Champ, and Wedge, 30 spaces are required.
Correct. And presently, there are 22 spaces available.
And if I recall correctly, what was the exact number of spaces that this board previously approved?
The 30.
The 30.
So that there was no relief at that time. But
Yeah,
with the
Correct.
change in the parking in the front and with the easement in the dumpster, 2 other spaces were displaced. So there's a change in 8 from the original approval. The cafe requires 4 spaces. The Wedge building 6 and Chomp 20. So
And that's including
all
the
seating.
inside and the outside.
Per your original
Yeah.
approval, those are the requirements.
Yeah.
So
How many spaces do we have with this shared parking? What was all?
there's 22 spaces.
With these, is that including the off-site spaces?
No.
So what is that current proposal?
The shared parking request is for the 22 spaces. And we, can you bring up that plan? And that shared parking ordinance is meant to reduce impervious surfaces, help the environment where you don't want to create an excess of parking if it's not needed. In this instance, there are 3 businesses on the property. And each of those businesses are unique and not overlapping. There's not 3 restaurants that operate at the same hours. There's a cafe that opens up at 6 in the morning and his primary business is before noon. You've got the Wedge, which is a low volume, type of business, quick turnover, people pick something up. And that's a midday retail operation. Mr. Glenn, he's a late afternoon, evening dinner crowd, 6 to 10 p.m. busy time. So what we've done in creating the shared parking is we've created, you see in the lower left corner of the plan, how the parking would transition over the course of the day.
Are we on the proposed condition?
Proposed condition, lower left-hand corner. So we've shaded the 4 spaces in front for the cafe per their zoning requirements. The 6 spaces for the Wedge, the 2 in front and the 4 to the rear. So those are the required zoning spaces. And during the morning up through 4 p.m., those spaces plus Mr. Glenn's spaces are available for those operations. So there's more than adequate parking for those 2 uses. After when Mr. Glenn opens up at 4 spaces get designated for his use. So he goes from 6 spaces to, so he goes from 12 to 18 spaces available at 4 o'clock because the Wedge only needs 2 at that time and the cafe only needs 2 at that time, but he's open till late. He's open till 10 o'clock. So he'll maintain those 2 spaces throughout the day in the evening. She closes at 6 o'clock. So all of her spaces, her 6 spaces become available for the Chomp use. So this is the 20 spaces during his peak operation. In going through this process with Mr. Glynn, we talked about, well, is there anything else we can do? And that's where Mr. Resnick indicated, well, they also allow for parking to be counted towards the requirement if parking is within a certain distance, as he indicated, 400 feet. So Mr. Glynn took it upon himself to put belts and suspenders on his application to say, okay, are there spaces available? So in the interim, since the application was submitted, he was able to secure those additional 14 spaces. So with those spaces, he satisfies the requirement. But we're here specifically to present to you under the shared parking ordinance that we satisfy the parking demands for this use. And the important thing to note is he controls what goes in those other businesses. So it's not like he's in a shopping center and they have to share parking. You have to identify, and the businesses change and they have no control. The owner has control, but he has control over what goes there, their hours of operation. So he's going to make sure over time that the businesses are compatible and work together to be successful. So
is it the testimony that based on the shared parking ordinance, regardless if he has any off-site spaces, these businesses can function within what the ordinance allows, taking into account the shared parking?
correct.
So we're not relying on the off-site parking to satisfy any requirements.
No.
That's an extra bonus, but if it goes away, he's still all right.
Correct, because we're presenting that plan with those hours of operation, that these spaces are allowed. And like I said, he doesn't open up till 4, so 12 additional spaces are available for the other businesses, though they don't need them, they're there and available. So, and that's how the shared parking operates. And she's closed at 6 o'clock, and then his business comes in, her spaces are available.
And where are those 12 spots adjacent to this property?
They're right in front.
It's on the town board.
Yeah, the town wharf property.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Bannon, do you have any correct me if I'm wrong, but the patio that is, the proposed patio, which eliminated, I believe, 6 spaces up front.
Mhm.
Do you have a diagram that compares and contrasts with the original site plan this board approved as compared to what's being proposed today?
That original plan was up there. Those spaces were very difficult to get to dimensionally and operationally.
Because I've got some huge concerns that there was an extraordinary amount of testimony that was taken in no part, and a great part of that was the parking. And when this board approved the original plan, it was assured that this is how this is going to go, and we got the spaces in there, this is going to work. I've got
I was not involved in
I'm
that.
concerned that now, 2 years down the road, we're saying, well, actually, that's not going to work. I've got some concern.
No, this is a much safer and functionally operational plan.
That may be, but what was originally proposed said, was this is how we're going to do it, and this is how we can do it. What I'm saying is, whatever you're saying today, I've got concerns now. You're coming back trying to change the plan. So is this the what was
Yes,
originally
that's the
proposed?
original approved plan.
Mr. Chair, if I may add to this and to your
Yes.
question. So obviously, this was approved prior to my appointment as building official. And kind of one of those situations where I've explained to a couple of people, and we talked about it in the planning board. Sometimes you put things on paper and it looks great, and then you get there and it just doesn't add up. So this is the plan that was originally approved, and I'm going to go over, if I can right now,
Yeah.
how we got to where we are today.
Yeah, so there were so starting with this plan, there were supposedly at that time 12 spaces on lot 96. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes,
That at the time of the approval.
as depicted on that
as
plan, there were 12
depicted,
spaces.
Somehow there were 12.
And
And
now
I
there are
recall making a statement, something to the effect that, okay, you're saying you can fit 12, how you shoehorn them in is not this board's problem, but you're representing to us that you're going to fit 12 on this lot. So it's up to you, the applicant, Mr. Glynn, to manage his traffic flow and figure out how he's going to fit 12 spaces on this lot, because we didn't find it particularly believable. But it's not up to us to design a parking plan. We're about quantity.
And that's, as a traffic engineer, doing this on all my life, and my expertise, that would have been problematic. So, that's why we looked at it and said, okay, this is what's reasonable, and we should present so you can have a safe and efficient operation for this business, for your pedestrians and for vehicular access.
I guess, but with the original plan, I'm not trying to go back on it, but then what thought was put into this to say, yeah, we got these 6 spots, we could do it. And now we've got the traffic experts looking at it saying, well, actually, this isn't feasible. I'm a little concerned about that.
I was not involved at the time, so I can't
I think part of
represent
it,
what was testified to.
Matt can further illuminate that there were the ones right jammed up against the east side of the building. Because the access now is different to the handicap bathroom than what we were shown at the original, the floor plan of the building has changed. The internal floor plan is not the plan that we approved anymore. The bathrooms are in different locations. One of them is accessed from the exterior now, and those parking spaces would prohibit ADA access to that. 'Cause before, you're going to be able to go in the front doors for the handicap access. That's no longer the case. Obviously, interior layout has changed, and there are minimum requirements for ADA access, and that exterior toilet, or that exterior access to the toilet wouldn't be feasible with this arrangement. Plus, there was the issue of this easement that was enacted, which changed that part of the property. But I think the main point is that we need to consider not necessarily how many spaces are on this lot or what the arrangement is on this lot, but that in total, his parking plan proposed at this time was compliant in this original.
I agree, yeah.
What he's now proposing, they're making the case that it is still compliant with the ordinance because the ordinance allows for shared parking.
Okay, and regarding the matters, I understand that, and regarding the matters with the supplementary parking off-site, this really sounds like it's really neither here nor
It
there.
doesn't affect.
Because what the applicant is saying is it's all gonna be able to taken care of in-house on this site.
That's the application,
And
correct?
those sites are not easily accessible from the building. You gotta walk down, go down Church Street, and then walk all the way back to the water to get to those eight, correct?
Just to speak to that for a moment, and again, after Mr. Ellis's point, it's really not here nor there as it relates to shared parking. There's nothing in the ordinance that talks about anything other than the fact that it's 400 feet boundary lines about.
Okay.
So, but the point being is that if there's a concern of this board about how do you entice patrons to park at these spots? Mr. Glynn can testify, and he has incentives with respect to coupons, rebates, take a photo of the Chomp sign at the off-street parking, show up at the restaurant, you're gonna get a rebate. He's gonna speak much more eloquently about how he wants to entice people to use these spots. Let me make also clear that in these spots, they are gonna be delineated as parking for these uses. There's gonna be signage, and obviously, we have every intent as the lessee with the lessor to ensure that our spots are available for our customers.
If they're needed.
And again,
If they're needed.
the offsite, I think, has no bearing because the proposal is that the 22 spaces on lot 96 and the wharf property satisfy the intent of the ordinance with regard to their shared plan. Yes, Mr. Swift.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if that's 100% accurate. I also think that the applicant's trying to show either or he is compliant with the zoning ordinance. Either he has met the requirements of the shared parking, and or he also has met the requirements in general, how many parking spots that he has to provide for all these properties.
In accordance with both ordinances.
Correct. So you kind of touched both of them and
Belts and
provided
suspenders.
evidence that he's satisfying both versions of it.
Yeah, because, and that's true, because technically, we could say, it's not our intent, we could withdraw the application for shared parking. But we don't want to do that because we've created a much better plan with an expert that's going to control parking and traffic internally on the property. But if we were to sit in a vacuum and we were to say, based on you getting these off-site leases, have you cured the violation? Have you cured the genesis of the NOV? Have you eliminated that issue? Yes, we have.
Right, but I guess one of the concerns that I would have is which leg are you standing on? Because
Shared parking.
ultimately, we're going to need to frame this motion in such a way that says, this is the plan. And we could, include findings of fact that there's a good faith effort to have a backup plan. But which one are we actually
The shared
looking at?
We are asking for relief this evening from the shared parking ordinance to satisfy the zoning ordinance based solely on the conditions on that property, as well as the parking that we get from the easement of the town.
Regarding just what we've got this exhibit up, the deck that's shown there on the, I believe it's the side closest to the water, is that different than the proposed patio deck area now?
I don't think it's changed.
Yeah,
The diagram looks, I can't tell if that's a design or if it's a dimensional change. I can't quite tell the way it's.
I'm not sure it matters because you can only have 20 seats outside.
Yeah, yes, that's,
Well, let me say that. You can only have a total of 80 seats on this entire property.
Yep.
The inside is limited by the fire marshal. The outside may also be limited by the fire marshal, but how he chooses to distribute those 80 seats, if in the summer, if he can safely put 70 of those seats on the patio and have 10 seats inside, and that complies with the fire marshal, then he can do that.
I'm only asking just because it may just be the way the diagram came on the proposed schematic was a little different. But if I recall, when we voted on this the last time, it was like that one corner area was the only setback variance that was concerned at that point. I just wanted to make sure that the footprint of the patio deck, whatever you want to call it now, is going to be the same.
yes. Yeah, there's a wall there and there's an access easement around the perimeter of the property that's maintained.
Okay.
I think it was a deck and now it's a patio.
Yeah.
Yeah, the patio, we don't count
Right.
because it's flush with the surface of the ground.
Okay, and all right. So if there's been a material difference or change proposed, I just want
Yeah,
to
I think it's a
make sure we're on the
design
same pace.
change from the deck that's there now or was there.
Okay.
Okay, with regard to the parking control ideas that Mr. Glenn has, the previous approval, there was a condition that 2 of the spaces be solely dedicated to his takeout operation, and that would be managed such that when the restaurant reached 80% of its internal capacity, no more takeout business could be done, and those spaces had to be given over to just the restaurant, because there was comments had at that and discussion had at that meeting about not only the parking, the traffic circulation on the site. If there are going to be a lot of people, in and out quickly doing pickup orders, there needed to be signage, a parking attendant, someone to manage that traffic flow versus other people coming in to park for the duration.
Yeah,
Is that still in the plan?
There is no intent to modify that condition at all.
All right, well, I think the floor plan is different now than it was before. Because before, I believe there was a dedicated window and there was like a little space in the front of the building. It was only for the takeout business, and the 2 spaces needed to be next to that window.
Yeah,
I don't think the floor plan of the internal building is now the same.
COVID kind of changed everything and that's transitioned over the last 2 years. So, the need for that window, we felt, things have changed enough that, and he changed his internal that,
So
they would come in.
are people just coming in the main door of the restaurant to do their pickup? There's no dedicated window.
Correct.
Correct. But 2 spaces will be designated for people who are picking up still.
We can
except
do
when
that.
the restaurant reaches 80% of its capacity.
We can do that, yes.
I mean, that's the original
Yeah,
decision. unless you want-
we're gonna have proper signing for the entire shared parking plan. Designated, these are the cafe parking spaces during this period, and so it'll be clearly signed, as is the offsite parking. Again, they'll be signed.
So the signs are going to list certain times of day and what operation can park in what space, and
Yep. That's
then
a
the
standard.
pickup spaces, if the restaurant reaches 80% capacity, those will no longer be signed as pickup spaces at that time, and just be parking for dine-in.
Yep.
We're not trying to modify that, and we will agree to a condition such as that to the extent you'd like to.
Well, I think one of the conditions, if we get to that point, is that all the conditions of the original approval remain in effect unless we specifically modify.
Absolutely.
And you got space 3 and 4, and you have the dumpster behind it.
Yep.
How are they gonna pick that up? Are they picking up during hours?
In the morning, there'll be no parking sign like 7 to noon or something. So when he controls when the trash is picked up, and what he's doing is, unlike the original plan, where each of the business had individual trash cans, he's created a dumpster area that'll be shared and controlled. So it'll be a clean operation. And it'll have a trash truck come in specific times when he's not in operation, and there are plenty of available spaces. So that'll be signed, no parking in the morning period.
Yeah, since we've touched upon the track, I'd like, and this may not be your area, maybe Mr. Glenn or the attorney can speak to it. One of the original conditions, this is from the decision, that trash area will be fully enclosed behind locked doors with a complete enclosure, and the green roof of the structure will be extended over the enclosure. So that means the trash is an actual structure with a roof, 4 walls, and locked doors. That is not what we're seeing in the current diagram that the zoning officials give.
As was, I just indicated, the original plan was to have the trash cans, and they were going to be inside within that area, with the requirement that the trash can't be where it was proposed. That building area was reduced, so the trash and the covered trash area was no longer going to be there. So that's why the
So
dumps.
that building area got reduced, so where the door is and the little tank is, that,
It comes in and it's a concrete patio area,
yeah.
main building.
Yeah, but someone's
It's
saying,
just not
So-
finished off
so-
there yet.
So it wasn't constructed, and it's
Yeah.
just a patio area for deliveries, backdoor kitchen. That's
fine,
the
but
back
now,
of the
but
kitchen.
now you've moved the trash somewhere else.
Correct.
So why can't that same design come with the relocated
Be-
trash?
Because it's a different building. The addition is a smaller, lower part, and it was just going to be, make that contiguous. Now it's with the main large building area.
Well, is that really true? I mean, right where that T11 is on the side of the building, isn't that where the trash is gonna be fenced in around? Isn't that what I'm looking at on the drawings?
Like, why can't the fence be walls with doors?
With a little roof over it? Or is that not something, does the fence will open up and the
Yeah.
trash truck will pick it up and go over?
Yeah, I don't know what the intent was, other than, he said it was going to be inside the building, and it's not going to be inside the building anymore because we have to move it. So we created an exterior fenced in dumpster area that combines everybody's trash in one. So there's not barrels all over the
No, I
site.
think the intent from previous decision was that the dumpster unit, whatever it's going to be inside of that enclosure, when the garbage truck comes to pick it up, that dumpster would be on wheels and it's rolled out, the truck picks it up, dumps it, and then puts it back in.
That's not what the proposed operation anymore.
Okay, well, that's not what's proposed, but that's what was approved, so we may
In-
not be willing to deviate, because there was considerable testimony about specifically having the trash in a fully sealed enclosure for smell, rodents, things of that nature, that very specifically, it had to be in a fully enclosed structure.
I don't know if you have,
I mean, it's
So
a
I think what-
condition right in the decision.
So I think what they're trying to, from the plans that I've seen that were presented to me, the original decision was to have what we would refer to is the toters, the small trash cans or like a small dumpster just for the Chomp business. So when they moved this dumpster to where it is now, the applicant, instead of having several articles of trash for the three buildings, he's putting one large dumpster that's gonna be accessible for all three businesses. The other issue, and I spoke with them about this exact with the roof on it. It's a larger dumpster that's not gonna be on wheels. That's gonna have to come in with what they call either a front load or, as was shown here, a rear load dumpster. So now they have to lift it off the ground and it has to go aerial to get into the truck. So could we have them put a roof like they did before? It's up to this board, but I think to take into consideration that they are gonna enclose it. It's gonna be used for all the businesses on the property. Right now, each individual business has their own. So that was brought to my attention. And I think it's this board's decision if you wanted to change it, but to take into consideration that it's a larger dumpster and that now they have to lift it off the ground to get it into the truck. So I think if it was a roof on it, it's going to be very difficult for the company to do that. That takes the dumpster out.
Well, I got a bunch of dumpsters on my property and the truck comes in. He can pick it up 6 inches off the ground, back up the width of the dumpster, dump it, put it back down and put it back in the little building. I guess what the chairman's saying and what I remember or recall of the last meeting, and maybe that's changed because of the easement and was been worked out with Mr. Bullock. I'm not sure, but there was a tenant there and, we tried to work with Chomp and get everything approved that way. And, the tenant in Mr. Bullock's building who had spent, she claimed $40,000 renovating the building, left crying and was very upset. And, we went through some hoops to make that happen. And I'm just wondering if, when I look at the building and where the fenced in area is, it looks like to me like it's abutting the side of the building just about, or could. And it wouldn't be hard to put some walls on it if you had to ventilate it a little bit for some airflow above. But if it had some doors and a little roof, it would be less unsightly other than, some sort of fencing around it. You still have to go and undo a fence. It's not that hard to undo a door and just put the dumpster in there. Those are my thoughts. I don't know what anybody else's thoughts are.
at the previous location, that was at the back door of that abutting property, and that's why those conditions were put in place.
That's right. So
So
now it's
we-
over by what? Is it over by 20 feet or 10 feet?
About 20 feet from where it was, because it was right up against the property line there where the building is.
So is the dumpster then on this proposed conditions 3 and 4?
Yes.
No, I mean, 3 and 4 are the parking, but it's,
That's the enclosure.
I mean,
That's the enclosure here, right? Yeah.
the closest edge of the dumpster is 10 feet. It's just outside of that 10-foot zone. The pink.
The fence, that's the fence
Yeah.
area.
The
So
fence.
they'll be, you'll be able to walk, there'll be 3 feet of clearance probably around the whole thing to
Awesome.
walk around to access and dump trash cans in.
3 feet inside the enclosure.
Yeah, you're gonna have to have a trash.
And the proposed enclosure now is a chain link fence? or
No,
a-
no, it'll be a opaque cedar fence.
Cedar fence.
I guess.
It'll be, a
Yes.
covered dumpster enclosed in an opaque fence area.
This was kind of the discussion about the dumpster just kind of gets me back to what I was saying before is we've been through this all already. There was extensive discussion taken and specifically about the dumpster and now conditions have changed, things have changed, and now it seems like you're asking for a redo and saying, well, actually, we don't want to put a cover on the dumpster. Can you tell me why the trash pad will not be fully enclosed?
Well, it was fully enclosed because it was part of the building. That's why it was designed that way. And with the smaller units and to be able to be pulled out.
I would just like to interject as well. There's only one reason that the dumpster is moving. It's because the abutter that was in closest proximity to that dumpster asked us to move it. And we had litigation about it, and we entered into agreements to obviate his concerns. So I think that it is important for the board to consider that the property that's going to be most affected by the placement of the dumpster in the original instance is the individual that filed an appeal. And we tried to obviate that concern, and that's why we're moving. It's not because
And-
it didn't work. It's not because we decided we didn't want to do it. It's because we were facing protracted litigation from the abutter that, in my opinion, that condition was meant to protect.
And I understand why I understand why the dumpster had to be moved. I get that. I get that. When I'm going back to the original, order grant, for the original plan, it was specifically said that the dumpster needs to be fully enclosed. And I understand it's being slid over. But so what I'm asking you guys is why are you not fully enclosing it now?
Because it was that was an addition that they were putting on, and that's where the trash area was gonna be. Now he's next.
Addition, you can put an addition on the side of the building where it's gonna go. You've already got one wall, you gotta build.
But for what purpose? It was done because of the neighbor, and the neighbor, we've agreed to move the dumpster and do it this way. And he's agreed to doing it this way, that it doesn't need to be covered anymore. He's not concerned about that because of how we're doing, it was moved and how we're doing in surrounding it, screening it, and how it'll be treated.
Well, I think, and this brings me to a point, we did receive a communication from a member of the public, which will mark as exhibit 1, because this will be on the opposition side. So one of the standards that we have to take into account is the hardship that you're seeking relief from was not created by prior action of the applicant. So if the moving of the dumpster has to happen because of this easement that was entered into after the decision was made, that could be that is a prior action of the applicant. This easement was entered into by the applicant after the decision was made.
Correct, but it was not it's not what I would call a volitional act. It's not something that the hardship wasn't created by his unilateral action. The hardship was created because an abutter filed an appeal, and we resolved it via settlement, a settlement agreement and easement. So the concept that would be considered a hardship of the applicant, the owner's own creation, is not founded in law.
Well, then what is the hardship that the dumpster has to be moved?
That's the dumpster moving, with the design of the previous approval of the dumpster was solely for that abutter. It was designed to address his concerns. Subsequent to that, they've come to an agreement that, okay, if you do this and you do that, we're satisfied. So it's overlapping. And so the thing, the thing you were trying to address as part of that approval was taken care of in the agreement after the suit of the decision.
Does the agreement outline how the dumpster enclosure is now going to look? Is because it did in the approval, but in the agreement, you're saying it changed. So does that actually explicitly outline how it's going to look?
I don't know if it says out of the easement and enclosed.
It's not
Not specific.
express as to that.
It's fenced.
Enclosed.
Is
It is fenced. It does not talk about that.
I mean, would it be safe to say then you don't know exactly what is in the mind of the abutter as far as how it's going to look now?
Well, I'll just say this, and then I mentioned to the board, we did reach out to Mr. Bullock. Mr. Bullock had conversations with your zoning official with respect to the 3 applications, and it's my understanding that he had no objection to what we were presenting, other than the 3 items that were discussed, and our application package included all the demonstratives of what we intend to construct for the enclosure for the dumpster.
So this,
Correct.
so I mean, I don't know, it looks okay to me.
And it just, if I may, I want to address one item. We are asking for a condition of the zoning approval to be modified. There was no specific variance sought or obtained for the location of the dumpster. It's just that based on the settlement agreement, it's moved. So the point being is that discussing, and I say this with respect, discussing the elements and going to the hardship requirement, I don't believe that it's applicable because all we're asking is a condition to be changed based off of an agreement with an abutter and appellant. The factors that are associated with a dimensional variance do not need to be assessed or determined to determine that it's appropriate for this board to modify their decision relative to the location of that dumpster. There's no criteria that we demonstrate that we've met all of those elements, just when it comes to our request that you acquiesce to us moving the dumpster.
But it's not
It's
that
not
simple.
just that.
It's
You're
not
also-
that simple.
You're also changing the two parts of the condition, both the location that was approved and the construction of the enclosure that was approved.
No, and it's certainly within this board's purview.
Oh, it could. be. I
I'm
mean, we have
I'm
that.
not suggesting that. It is absolutely within your purview to determine whether you're gonna maintain that condition or whether you're willing to modify it. All I'm saying is that the statutory elements and elements under the ordinance with respect to dimensional variance do not need to be contemplated in determining that you believe it's appropriate to move that dumpster. I'm not suggesting that the board does not have jurisdiction to decide whatever they want. I'm just saying that the elements that need to be satisfied, and that's my opinion, and I certainly, your zoning official, your solicitor may or may not agree with that, but I'm just saying that the exercise of going through the elements, I don't believe that's necessary because it's just a request that we modify a condition. There was never a variance sought for where the dumpster goes. There was never, it's in a setback. We need dimensional relief from the location of the dumpster because it's in a setback. That's not what happened. It's that a condition was placed on the approval, and now we're asking it to be modified based off of changed conditions. And I completely understand. It's within the board's purview. I just want to make sure, Mr. Chairman, that we're not hung up on the elements, because I don't think they apply.
And you can understand that from the point of view of this board, what this looks like from an optics standpoint is that we don't have the dozen people that sat here for 3 hours to discuss this the first time around. We don't have that level of public comment. So what this looks like is an end run around a condition you don't want to satisfy anymore.
I understand, but we filed applications with notice requirements and abutters notices and radiuses that were the exact same as the original approvals. So respectfully, the concept that the public didn't have notice and that interested parties wouldn't present here, it's not true. It's the same exact notice. It's the same exact radius. We did all of that. We would not be on the calendar this evening unless your zoning official determined that we had satisfied notice requirements. So respectfully, this is not trying to do anything clandestinely. We've been at a preliminary, we're at the planning board on Monday, duly noticed. We're here this evening, duly noticed. We've done everything that we are, that we need to do to make sure that the public understands what we're doing and can ask questions and can appear this evening. So this is not clandestine. This is a public hearing.
Yeah, so we'll just record for the record, this letter that was received from, Mr. Paul Adaman of 65 Church Street, stating his opposition to, this application, citing, in the letter that he believes it does not meet the standard, that the hardship is not the result of any prior action of the appellant and does not result primarily from the desire of the applicant to realize greater financial gain. And it's not specific to the dumpster, it's in general, the parking, whatever is being sought be amended here, he's referencing. So that will be on file as part of the application. I mean, we could the parking situation, the variance for the shared parking that could very clearly be linked to prior action of the applicant because you built the patio in the place where the parking was supposed to go.
That's what I was going to ask, Mr. Chair. You know, has there been evidence either from the building official that construction of the patio has already begun?
Yes, and just while I have the floor, I just to keep in mind that I understand that it was proposed for a covering over the dumpster. That would have to go before the fire marshal to see if that is even legal to do. Because it's not, that's not on my purview, that's on the fire marshal's purview. But there is, depending certain fire code that will not allow a roof over a dumpster of certain size. So just however you decide, just it would ultimately have to be reviewed by the fire marshal.
Yeah, it's true. And any condition would be that it would have to be compliant with the fire code, whether that means putting in sprinklers in the roof or whatever is necessary. That would be up to the fire marshal to determine how safely to implement that.
And going back to the building official, regarding the patio that is taken up, I believe the original 6 spots, has that already been constructed?
It was started, but it's not completed, but that's how this is started. There is a stop work order on the patio.
Weren't there trees planted?
Yes, there were trees planted. However, those trees were on site. They were planted with the intent that if this board said no, they would come out. The trees were purchased, they were on site before they were to die. They were planted, but it was noted that if this board says no, the trees come out.
Yeah, I mean, when I was there a couple of weeks ago, the patio looked substantially along, earthwork had taken place to create that patio area. So the applicant, I mean, the hardship of not being able to have those 6 spaces is the result of the applicant building the patio.
Yeah.
Well, and that was, again, he didn't do it without coordination with the town.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that for 1 second. So the moment that Mr. Glynn received the C&D, I was contacted. There was no work. There was no dispute about the issue. There was an understanding that he made a mistake because he felt like he could do that and rely on shared parking without this board's approval. And I had discussions with your zoning official immediately. So what we did when we identified that that was an issue was work was stopped, no further work was performed, and we put together these zoning applications as fast as we could. We secured the off-site parking as fast as we could. And in fact, even if we were to be lucky enough to get the approvals we need from this board, the patio cannot continue to be constructed until your zoning official signs off on it with respect to CRMC, because it is within CRMC's jurisdiction. And there was a assent that was provided to construct that patio. And in order for us to get a modified assent and to continue to construct that patio, it requires a sign off from your zoning official. So, there was no intent to fight the NOV in any way, shape, or form. I can tell you in many circumstances and representing clients, the first thing we do when we have an NOV, whether we're going to capitulate or not, is we file an appeal to preserve rights. That's not what Mr. Glynn did. He did everything he could to rectify these issues as fast as possible. And I had meetings with Mr. Ferreira, Mr. Cabral, and your solicitor, Mr. DeSisto, almost immediately after this happened to put together a plan for what we could do to fix this issue.
So what is the hardship that's driving your need for the shared parking in the space that's because you lost those spaces due to the proposed patio?
Well, because the lot itself is unique with these three uses, with these 3 different tenants. And the reality is, and I say this, I wasn't at the last hearing and I'm not a traffic expert, but when I look at 3 parking spots on each side in an area where people will be walking through to get into a restaurant, this is a better plan. You don't have to be a traffic expert to understand that corridor, the entrance to the restaurant, where people could be potentially waiting to get in or the like, to have 3 spots on each side backing up, it's because of the unique way in which the property functions with these 3 structures on this small lot. And this is, I mean, these structures are obviously pre-existing non-conforming as it relates to that issue. So when it comes to the hardship and whether it was created, this hardship was always there. This property always looked like this. And the reality is that in removing these spots, we're just making a better plan. The particularities of this property and why a shared parking agreement is necessary is clear. It totally meets the intent of the ordinance. It's what is envisioned by way of shared parking, as Mr. Bannon mentioned, to reduce impervious surfaces and to usher in unique businesses on the same lot functioning together so that Water Street businesses and restaurants and the like can function appropriately with what we know is a dearth of parking in the area. I mean, everyone understands that Water Street has parking issues, and it's because of the uniquely situated lots and properties within that street, many being pre-existing non-conforming, having incredible coverage issues if you were to go through zoning at this time. So I think the hardship was always there. It's just that now we're creating a better plan that works more ergonomically, manages the traffic internally in a much better way. And so I don't believe that element should provide this board any pause in granting the relief that we're seeking.
So I don't disagree that the new parking plan is more logical, appears to have better circulation, is probably a better arrangement for customers. So if the hardship was always there, then why did your client present a plan to this board just to jam some parking onto his site to get this passed the first time around, if it wasn't going to be a workable plan for him anyways?
Well, I want to answer that question being collegial and careful with respect to other professionals that were here. This is the team that Mr. Glenn assembled to present these petitions and applications before this board. So we believe that we've created the best plan possible with Mr. Glenn, and owners who don't have a great deal of development experience, and I'm sorry to say that, Mr. Glenn, but Mr. Glenn's not a developer. And he relied on professionals that he retained to put together these applications and to make argument and presentation before this board. And quite frankly, I know that what we're presenting here today, essentially through Mr. Bannon's work, is a much better plan. And I believe that it's very difficult to see it any other way, in my opinion, respectfully.
Let me ask it this way, Mr. Bannon, if I can ask you to come back. Is it reasonable to believe that the original parking plan could have been deemed workable if it were reviewed solely on paper?
I would not have presented that plan.
You would not have.
No.
Okay.
That doesn't answer the question, though.
Right. Is it reasonable to believe that someone who was not a parking engineer could have looked at that plan and believed it to be workable?
I've seen plans that have looked like they're on napkins that have been approved. So yes, that happens.
And is it your expert testimony that the plan being presented now is both more workable and safer for the general parking arrangement on this property?
Very much so, not just for parking, but for pedestrian flow and access to the buildings that will now occupy and be a busy area. That's one of I deal with pedestrian safety and access regularly. And, that would be my main concern relative to people walking and entering. During the busy summer periods, there are going to be people standing out in front, and they're going to be standing on the patio to wait to be seated. So the last thing you want is a idling car sitting 5 feet from the door and backing out because people have to move for someone to get out of a parking spot. It's, you know, that's his front door. And you want a pleasant, inviting environment. And that's what he's trying to create. And he thought he had done that in coordinating with the town initially when he brought the idea up.
Yes, I would say that we were reviewing that plan and I saw that little indent there with the 3 cars on each side. I was shaking my head.
Yeah, we all were.
Yeah, so
But it was presented that that was workable.
it was, but I think
But it's
common sense also said, you're
Yeah.
gonna go in and out of a restaurant, but
It's always been recognized that it's a tight site.
yeah.
That's always been the case, especially when you get in around what is now Wedge and the adjacent property.
And I'm an engineer. I look at plans all the time. So, you know, you see something on a plan, you perspective wise, you don't, may not understand. Yes, you know, it looks good on paper, but functionality is the key. And that's why you always go out and make sure that, okay, how is this going to operate? And is, Mike had indicated, Sam's not a developer. He doesn't, you know, he knows the building and can work on the building, but he doesn't know site specifics, drainage, and all these other things that need to be done. So
I'd just like to say one thing. I'm a land use attorney. I rely on Mr. Banner. I wouldn't have any idea whether ergonomically a parking arrangement would work. I do this about 2 or 3 nights a week. I rely on my experts. And Sam was the same thing. He relied at that time on the people that he put together. But apropos to your point, this hardship has always existed. It has always existed.
and I can anecdotally say, you know, I testified against the project, a restaurant project down in Narragansett that was being pushed through. And not that I was against the project, it was my review of the site, its access and circulation. There were parking spaces that were shown on the plan that were totally unfunctional and I'm saying to the business owner, you're going to build it and they can't use it. So you're going to have to change it. What happened? He got it approved and then he had to change things and buy another lot and do the things to make it functional. But yes, you do see that happen. And you know, that's why, you know, you have to fully review and understand the proposal.
So I just want to make one point. That building, the barge upside down, that's going to be the new home of John, was never a restaurant. So there was never this contemplation of use. And therefore, there was never a need to have this many parking spaces. In the past, it was an open wharf. So just to make that point that now it is going to be in need of parking spaces because it's going to be a restaurant.
Yes, and I think during
And
the,
your reference to in the history and it's now going to be in a new phase and where it's going to need.
yeah,
So now we're kind of.
and as was discussed at the planning board and Mike referenced it, with revitalization of the waterfront, with the apartments and businesses like Sam's coming in, is putting a burden on and working with the town. There are opportunities to provide public parking. There's areas of plenty of parking that is unavailable, but potentially could be available for the businesses. So it's working with the business owners, and that's where, you know, Mr. Glynn, that, you know, he initially went to the church and said, you know, what are your plans here? You have this massive parking lot totally underutilized. So we started that process, and I think the church had been talking with the town. There's the Forrester property, fully occupied, 75 to 100 spaces never used, right up front, right along Water Street. So it's an opportunity for the town to work with everybody because it's quickly happening.
We know there's a problem here. I mean, that there were 8 people that testified the last time against this application because of overcrowding in this neighborhood, because of the parking, because of traffic. There's only one who gave a brief statement in favor of it. And one of the previous neighbors of Mr. Stephen Servant of 2262 Water Street, who knew parking was a major issue. And he said he was happy to hear that the town has a plan to start addressing this issue. Well, that was 2 years ago. Not a single thing has changed to this day. It's still a problem.
Well, but as things start happening and things are redeveloped, I think the the matter. And, you know, there's been a turnover in planning and whatever, but it takes that desire and goal to work up a plan, make it, how can we make things better? But the thing is, it's a changing thing as properties get redeveloped or repurposed from a residential to commercial, as was proposed earlier. So, you know, there'll be pressures. So it's up to the town to work with. I'm sure the businesses want to work with the town and to try to create a workable waterfront that works for everybody. You know, you want to promote walkability and between businesses and access. You know, parking up here is available that can be, you know, presented for visitors and walking down to the waterfront. So, you know, there are things that can be done that community do rather than to public parking and wayfinding. So, you know, there's a process, and I think the town can work with the business, and the business owners would be, I'm sure, willing to work with the town.
Fine, and I think one of the major issues, not necessarily the businesses, it's residents who live in this neighborhood not being able to park their cars because they don't have driveways. They have to rely on street parking, and Water Street was already way over capacity 2 years ago, 5 years ago, and it just keeps getting worse. So, I mean, I think you presented testimony that you believe that the parking plan you have addresses that problem, that will adequately house the parking needs of these three businesses.
Yes.
Based on the shared parking plan. The offsite is an extra bonus, should that be available, however long it's available. That may help. Nice gesture for the neighborhood or something. But we're looking at the parking that is on site here.
Yes.
And let me ask the applicant and or the attorney here a question. That if the parking arrangement as proposed were to be approved, would you agree to a sunset clause on that, that after the summer season in the fall, you come back again and we evaluate if this plan is working, and if not, it needs to be adapted in other ways?
I hesitate to agree to that, Mr. Chairman. And the reason is I think that we've presented expert testimony that more than substantiates the fact that this will work. I'm also concerned about that because what is the mechanism? What is the standard? What is the criteria that would be utilized to determine if it's functioning appropriately? I mean, here, with respect to the board, we have presented unrebutted testimony from a traffic and parking expert that this shared parking plan will work. And so I would ask the board to grant that relief this evening without a condition that there be some type of review. I mean, I say this again with respect, this is not an enforcement body. Your zoning official is the enforcement officer for the town. So to the extent that we are in some way violating the approval, or it is not functioning as was represented and in the conditions, it's your zoning official's job as the enforcement agent of the town to look into those issues. I don't believe that it would be within the purview of the zoning board. So we would object to that.
Right, and we have in fact done something similar in other cases where we've approved something conditionally because it was questionable in our mind whether it was an effective long-term solution. Let it be implemented for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, whatever the timeline we set was, and then have the applicant come back again to demonstrate that it is functioning as presented and is achieving the goals that the applicant said it would achieve.
Particularly if you have such faith in your expert and in the plan itself and in the stewardship of what's best for the town, why wouldn't you want to revisit it just to make sure that it's actually serving its purpose?
Because, if I may,
Yes.
it's a little different than past applications with sunset clauses, is that they testifying and they put application forward that meets the requirements of the zoning ordinance. They're not asking for anything extra. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, although we have done sunset clauses, there's certainly some legal complications that can arise. And I agree with my brother a little in terms of how do we measure that? That becomes a legal complexity. I'm not sure if the town wants to go down that road. In addition to that, findings have to be made today that either this plan is compatible with comp plan, or it's not compatible. It's the least amount of necessary or not. I think it's got to be definitely yes or no, or else it's going to open up some legal issues, complications in the future. That's my recommendation.
And you know,
Plus, you have
relative-
travelers there, they all of a sudden they start being busy. It's a shared space, so it's very hard to judge.
well, and
What?
yes, but relative to the zoning regulation, he needs 20 spaces. At 6 o'clock, he has 20 spaces. He meets the zoning regulations.
Right.
So, you know, and that's when it's going to be busy. But he has those 20 spaces, but there are also other spaces that he can't count that are available on that wharf lot. Plus, he's got offsite parking. So, you know, to be able to evaluate what's there, that would be very difficult. What could be is that we are in conformance with the shared plan, that Wedge doesn't stay open till 8 o'clock at night and parking isn't available. You know, those are the things that are enforceable issues. So if it's not working because we changed something, but we feel that, you know, he needs 20 spaces at 6 o'clock because that's when he's busy. That's the zoning code. That's the requirement, and he meets that.
Could he find that he needs 20 spaces at 2 o'clock? The
He's not
restaurant
open.
is- Well, capacity, what time does the restaurant open?
4 o'clock.
The earliest the restaurant opens is 4.
Presently, yes, that's his plan. 4 o'clock. And he doesn't, and he, you know, it's a ramp up, you know, everybody doesn't show up at 4 o'clock. It's a ramp up thing, busy 6 to 10 PM. That's his operation.
I'd just like to add one other thing. Is obviously, a zoning board's authority flows from state legislation, which imbues your ordinance and essentially obviously has to be in line with the enabling legislation. This is an introduction of some type of standard, which quite frankly isn't found in state law. It's not found in the ordinance, and it is turning this board into a quasi enforcement board, and that is not what it is. And so I am not saying this in an adversarial way. I'm a student of the law, and quite frankly, I believe that type of sunset provision is actually beyond your jurisdiction because there is no enabling legislation in Rhode Island general laws or your ordinance that would allow that. And so please, that's not disrespect. It's my view of the ordinance and the clear language and what a zoning board can do.
So if the agreement isn't working out to the beneficial use of all of the restaurants and the parking spaces, how do we resolve that?
If there was
If there's, you know, if there comes to an issue,
Kind of builds a parking garage.
is there, I mean, because I think that was the intent of what you were trying to get at, is that,
Yeah,
you
the
know,
intent was that, okay, if we approve this sharing parking plan, which is different from the outright part, if he had all 30 spaces or whatever on the property, different, he meets the calculations. This shared thing about what hours overlap, don't overlap is more subject to interpretation. If there are times when Wedge is going to be super busy and need more spaces during the overlap time, we can't foresee that. So we don't know that the plan is going to function with the hours of operation exactly as they say it's.
The thing is, he owns whole property. He owns those businesses. He leases those buildings. So has control. So they all work together and function together. So they're all successful. So it's not like he doesn't have a say because he needs it to operate well, to be functional and successful. His tenants need certain things. They've worked it out. They've agreed. If one of those tenants leaves, he has total control of what goes in there. It's not like another property owner has the right to put whoever he wants in there. You can put another restaurant in. That's not going to happen. He has control of that property and those buildings.
Hypothetical, so if the restaurant that is a breakfast cafe that has 4 spots ends up going out of business, then what happens to the agreement? Do you guys forge, does that owner now forge a new agreement by said parties with the new party? And they're entitled to the same 4 spots, or how does?
He's in control of the lease. The lease agreement with,
He can control the use, which means he
The
can
kinds of
control the
operation.
spots that are needed, and he control the fact that if you're gonna enter into a lease with me, a condition of it is the shared parking, and this is your use, and these are your hours of operation. The other thing I just want to state is the concept that an approval or a condition to an approval could be violated is every single project that's ever been approved. It is beyond your jurisdiction respectfully to speculate that there's gonna be a violation of this plan.
But aren't you
That's-
asking us to go from 30 to 22 spots and approve that? You're asking us to lessen the allotment of spots.
Correct.
So it
based
is in
on-
our power now to make, not me, because I'm not a voting member, but to allow that and to try and safeguard whether or not that'll be abused by the very decision, because it's the only time we're gonna touch it,
And I think it goes
you
to
know?
whether or not they violated, if Wedge is open different hours or what have you. We're not there to police that. The part of our job is to prevent this action from creating a nuisance or a hazard in the neighborhood. If the parking burden by reducing from 30 to 22, in our opinion, is going to lead to a nuisance or a hazard in the neighborhood, then it's not in our interest to approve that reduction. We don't feel that the shared parking plan alleviates that nuisance or hazard, then it would be within our purview not to approve it.
but you're saying then you would go to the previous plan that you feel is not functional and maybe a hazard? We're proposing a plan that works. We've shown it works in accordance with the town's regulations. And I don't know what else to say. That, the plan that was previously is problematic, and you understand that based on, how it's been developed, how the building's been built, and how it would function. There are issues relative to the easement that required moving of the dumpster. Building access for ADA that makes the space that was a bit right next to the building not functional. So that plan, as it sits today with what's there today, is not functional.
And I have to add that we presented expert testimony. And that needs to be strongly considered, because certainly zoning board members, planning board members can rely on their understanding of the area and your common knowledge and your experience with the area. But it is not appropriate to opine as an expert in these areas. We have presented uncontradicted testimony tonight that this shared parking plan works, it meets the ordinance, and that it will function appropriately with these very uses.
Well, to be fair, we haven't done public comment yet. I don't
Well,
recognize any other parking experts. in the room.
Excuse me.
But
To that effect, actually,
I would like to hear.
I might suggest that we take a breather on this and hear what the public has to say.
My
Sorry.
thoughts exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So is there anyone in the public who would like to offer any comments on this application? Yes, sir. If you'd like to come up, state your name and address, please.
My name is Fletcher Rawls. I live at 296 Water Street.
I believe you testified at the previous meeting that we have on record here.
Yes. My bedroom window is directly across the water. It's really directly across from the Trafford side. And so from our second floor, we look all the way down the wharf, down to both sides, Trafford's and this location. And I wish I had a camera with me, a reporter, because today's what, March 15th? This last weekend, when the weather was nice, all of the parking was in use at Trafford's and at Chomps. And we, you know, it's not even summertime. So I'm an expert eyewitness. I've been here 20 years and I've watched the change that's taken place at that location. And I just think it's a matter of common sense that in the summertime especially, even though Trafford's was using assisted parking or whatever you call it,
Valet park.
yeah. Even then, it was a free-for-all, cars backing into each other. I understand the gentleman's concern about safety and everything, people walking through the cars and everything. It's been that way. There's just no control. But in spite of what's being presented about the difference in hours right now, I think that the problem is going to be between those two restaurants, not the little cafe and not the cheese place. And it's just not going to work. And you people are going to have to figure out what to do about it. There's a whole bunch of other things that I could say, but you know, just to keep it nice and simple, that's our biggest problem. There just isn't enough room, and no matter who juggles what, there's not going to be any more space, and that's all it is. Thank you.
Thank you for testifying again. Hold on, we're gonna take all the comment and then we'll ask you to, well, is there anyone else in the public? Okay, so it appears to be all the public testimony. So if you want to come up and if you want to address the comment made by Mr. Rawls.
It's just very briefly, and Mr. Bannon may want to piggyback on this response, but just to be clear, there is an easement with the town with respect to certain parking spaces. And that easement agreement, as well as the plan, delineates the different parking spots go to different uses. There is those that are demarcated for the marina. There are those that are demarcated for the public in general. There are those that are demarcated for the other restaurant that was just referenced. And there's those that are particularly delineated for Chomp. So, and the ones that I'm referring to are those that are indicated in A in the easement plan. So with respect to the restaurant that was just referenced, as well as our lot, there are specifically delineated spots that do not overlap for those two different restaurants. And perhaps Mr. Bannon would like to add something, but I just want to be very clear that that parking lot down there, it's not an amorphous glob. It's not a free fall. It's A, M, P, and then apologies. I'm not sure what the other restaurant is delineated as, but they're expressly stated, and there's going to be signage to that effect. So when we talk about looking at the lot and it's completely full, well, there could be people at the marina. There could be people from the public that are using the public spots. We have certain rights to those A spots. Now, of course, the public, if you look at that easement agreement, the public can use the public spots. And if the public chooses to go to any restaurant in the area, they can certainly do that. But we can't rely on it for purposes of satisfying zone. So it's not a free for all down there. It's very well delineated.
And I agree that it's delineated with signage. I think it's a matter of what is your client going to do to ensure that that is respected? That the signage is respected with regard to his.
Well, you have two main businesses that want to coexist and operate together. They understand that. And as indicated, Trafford has a valet during their peak summer periods because they only have so many spaces and they've secured off-site parking. Mr. Glenn has been proactive in securing that off-site parking. So yes, we actually have more spaces available to us today than what was previously approved.
I think that There was mention of how Mr. Glynn was going to be dealing with or incentivizing the off-site parking.
Be happy to provide some testimony.
Yes, if that's possible.
Good evening, everybody. Should I identify myself?
Just for the
Yeah,
record.
Sam Glenn, 23 Dyer Street, and the owner of Chomp Kitchen and Drinks. So as I mentioned in the planning board meeting on Monday, we've come up even prior to this, this application and over the course of the past 2 years that we've been going through the construction process. I've heard time and time again, we don't have a parking problem, we have a parking management problem. I hear it when I sleep, I hear it when I'm drinking coffee in the morning, I hear it every time. And so being the problem solvers that we try to be as small business owners, we wanted to leverage our social media following as well as the other avenues that we have for reaching out to our guests. We have over 30,000 emails, we have over 22,000 Instagram, and we have a big reach. We reach a lot of people every week with our marketing channels. And what we hope to do and what we plan to do even before we had secured the offsite parking was incentivize people to use municipal lots. And how are you going to do that? Well, one thing that COVID taught us is QR codes they're everywhere. And what you can do is have somebody take a selfie with the QR code. It gets an alert to our restaurant that you're coming this way. We'll give you a 10% off for your dinner that night. Things of that nature that are very interactive. And we have proof that our guests are responsive to those through, I don't like to say when we pivoted, I refuse to use that word anymore, but during the pandemic, when we were changing every 2 weeks, we would send out email blasts of, hey, only open your trunk, only do this, only do that. And without fail, nearly 100% of the time, people followed and they acted. We have a very intelligent, very savvy, very technologically minded demographic that dines with us. So these wayfinding techniques with signage and such, we plan to address those with the offsite spots with, clearly demarcated parking spots, as well as the ones on the wharf. As you can see in the shared parking plan, we'll have marks just like Trafford's does across the street of what the spot is and what it is for, and we'll do our best to manage it the best we can. And so to get back to the offsite parking, if you will, we want to do that the best we can. We also want to promote the walking and the biking too. So we have plans to not only the selfie thing with the picture on Instagram or tag us or whatever it is, but we want to put a bike rack somewhere. We don't know where that is yet. This meeting might kind of force our hand on where we put that, but we want to incentivize people to use that. And I think that's one of the missions of the Waterfront Overlay District is to incentivize pedestrian traffic, incentivize biking, incentivize boating. We have some fun ideas for the boat stuff too, but I'll leave that for a later day. But we really want to be a good neighbor. Over the past 2 years here, I've met a lot of folks on Water Street. I've heard a lot of what their concerns are, and I've done everything in my power to address that the best way I can. We found offsite parking when this became an issue in October, and with talking with Mike, with talking with Paul, we did everything that was asked of us, and I think we did more than we needed to. But honestly, these guys will attest to it too. I want to have the most parking on Water Street. That was my goal. And I think that we did a pretty good job in the time that we had available to us. I think even after, this meeting today, we're still going to try and seek alternatives for parking. And we've had people reach out to us from the town too, about creative ways of doing things too, to manage the congestion on Water Street. And we want to be somebody that can help spearhead this and make it easier for the town, because during planning on Monday, there was a member that had mentioned that we brought a plan to the board and they hadn't seen that before. And that was something that I took a lot of pride in hearing. And it was kind of a feather in our cap, if you will, on Monday night. And we are proactive. We are pragmatic. We have to be. If we have an issue with parking, it affects our sales. So nobody has more of an incentive to try and figure out these problems, to work with neighbors, to work with residential neighbors as well. If there's an issue, my door is always open. We're in the hospitality industry. Let's not forget that. My job, my core mission of my business is to make people feel good. And if I'm not doing that, then I'm not doing my job, and I'm not doing any service to my business if I'm not doing that to our neighbors. So we're all ears. We want to do the best we can on Water Street. We realize all the constraints. We realize the work that the town has done, the work that you guys have done to to accommodate us the best that you can, and we appreciate it. We want to continue doing that with the town for, just as we have for the past 10 years. We want to keep going and make Warren a special place. So I appreciate your time. If you have more questions, I'm happy to help.
Thank you. I don't think anyone is necessarily opposed to your business or your restaurant.
No, and I'm not referring that at all.
And it has a demonstrated track record of being a terrific business for this town. And this waterfront location can be nothing but good for your business. We're just struggling with how do we ensure that the people who live in this area of the town have safe and reliable streets. They're not overcrowded. There's not the parking, the traffic issues. So you've heard, talk to the neighbors, you've heard things. We hear the same thing. People will come up in the supermarket and say, how could you have approved that? How dare you make this street more congested, than it already is? There's a lot of animosity in that area of town about the way the traffic and the parking. And you certainly didn't create that. It was there before you decided to move your business here. We just want to ensure that we feel comfortable that every conceivable measure possible has been taken to satisfy what needs to be done for your business to not make the situation worse.
Yeah, and we'll always continue to, I'll talk to Matt if he has any concerns, any neighbors that come up. We're happy to try and accommodate the neighborhood the best we can. That's something that we've done for 10 years. We don't plan on stopping now.
And I'll just give a brief example of that. There was an issue with the clutter. We didn't get into protracted litigation. There was never any motions. There was never any paperwork. There was no briefing. There was no arguments before the court. We sat down and we brokered a settlement agreement and we signed it and we moved on. And I think that that's the spirit of how Mr. Glenn operates. If there's an issue, let's figure out how to resolve it. I have a lot of clients when they get appeals that's not how they do it. And I think that that was very demonstrative of the way that he'll act in the future if issues arise.
Question I've got for Mr. Glenn, if you don't mind. Separate from the dumpster regarding the parking, the request for the parking variance, if that were not to be granted, how would that affect your business, if at all?
I would defer to him.
I'd like to answer that question because the reality is that if this is denied this evening with respect to the shared parking, we are still in compliance with your zoning. The reason for the NOV has been completely cured. So again, I hate to travel down this road, but the reality is that we don't get the approval. The patio can still remain there. It's going to look the same. We're just gonna be relying on off-street parking. So I'm sorry, off-site parking. So the reality is that in that situation, at least in the short term, he would be able to function as far as opening up. Yeah, but I don't think that the parking on the lot would be managed as well as it is now. I guess there would not be a shared agreement in place. There would not be the delineation of the spots like we suggested. And again, I just think that the development that would be moving forward is not the best development that can move forward. The best development is a development that realizes the intent of your ordinance in using shared parking when there's businesses with different uses and different peaks on the same lot. So the reality is the project can still occur without that relief, but it's not the best development that could be approved.
I think the detriment of not approving the shared parking is fine. He can still comply. He's relying on the off-site parking. But that's kind of an unknown quantity, that off-site parking. Particularly the one that's 6 months and then month to month, that could end. The other one could end.
Mr. Chair, to that point, I would certainly, and you touched on it earlier, you could certainly make a condition that those leases have to be active those parking spots have to be available, and if not, they have to come back for relief.
Well, that's,
That will satisfy, I think, your issue there, whether or not 6 months from now.
Yeah.
He loses 6 of them and it's in good faith commercially, but now there's 6 less parking spaces. Now what?
if,
You can put, in addition to that condition, you can ask him to mandate they come back for relief because you relied on all the parking spaces that's being presented tonight.
or
That
if
was
we don't,
satisfied.
if we don't rely on that model and accept the shared parking, then we don't have to get involved with his off premises parking.
I think because it's been presented tonight, I would suggest and recommend that you rely on, in your opinion, your decision, either way, as to all the spots. And there's something, the town can get some comfort or some guarantees, knowing that if those spots in 5 years, those 8 spots go away, he needs to come back for relief. There goes your second opportunity of sorts to look at the situation and make sure that the current parking situation 5 years from now is okay. If not, again, he has to ask this board for relief.
And so if those spaces that he's leasing off-site were to decrease in quantity, he would either have to decrease the capacity of his restaurant or Wedge or the cafe or something to meet whatever he has left available, or come back. I mean, it doesn't have to come back to change his capacity in the restaurant if he wants to go down, but if he wants to keep the same capacity, you have to come back and seek some other parking arrangement to make up for whatever.
I think that would satisfy your concerns then.
But I think I'm still back to where I was at the beginning of this application, that I'm back to questioning which leg we're standing on, because we're either approving the shared parking.
You could do shared parking relying on all 32 spots, if that would clean it up a little, versus trying to separate.
But the shared parking isn't for 32 spots.
For 22.
For 22.
Shared parking is only for 22. The other one,
The shared parking in, that should work. And then he has a backup if you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm more mentally accepting of the idea that the off-site parking is a good faith effort to show that the applicant is not in any way wanting to compromise the integrity or the safety of the neighborhood. And as a good faith effort, I think that makes a lot of sense. But ultimately, what they're proposing is a shared parking plan that meets the requirements in and of itself.
You can get guarantees on that good faith effort, is what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, and if if I may suggest a condition that tethers these both together, but in a way where we are clearly standing on the leg of the shared parking agreement, we would agree as a condition that we will make all commercially reasonable efforts to keep those leases in place. My concern is this, is that if there's a condition that those spots have to be in place in perpetuity, we're putting Mr. Glynn at the leverage of anybody in town that has these spots that could charge a completely draconian price, or or just put him in a position where it's just not commercially reasonable. Now, I think you've heard testimony tonight that he will attempt to keep those in place in every way he can. You've heard testimony that he will actually make an effort to get even more spots, but to introduce a third party that has control over this situation to which he would have no power, I don't think that that's right. I think we rely on shared parking, and we will agree before this board as a condition and as a good neighbor to do everything we can to keep these 14 spots in place and to go get more.
I think a good faith effort makes sense. That, I mean, it'd be different if you only had 2 spaces on the property and you had to rely on this offsite. But that's not the case. Your shared parking plan satisfies the requirement.
And you also have a 5-year lease on the larger.
It's actually, if I may, it's actually 10. It's a 5-year base. It's a 5-year option. It's at our election. And I can tell you, I negotiated that lease with Mr. Glynn and the lesser. We tried for 20. That's what we tried. And I think that the appetite is that there will be an extension of that, but I can't promise it here today because we're relying on a third party that I can't tie.
And what I was saying, Mr. Resnick, is I think part of the reason we're here today is because your client did take some unilateral action with the patio that kind of precipitated a lot of this. So I think he needs to understand, he needs to be open to some concessions. If there's going to be motion in the affirmative, he needs to understand that he bears some responsibility and blame here for this. So he may need to be open to the idea of some concessions, whatever they may be.
Yeah, absolutely. But
Some of it
again,
came from the litigation with Mr. Bullard.
Oh, and I agree, there's the issue with the dumpster, but there were 6 spots. And I understand your expert has indicated that they were unfeasible, but we've been through that before. There was a representation made that they would be feasible. And now we're basically asking, hey, let's take a second look at this whole thing.
Right.
That's not a good
To us
situation.
Again, with another lawyer and another parking expert to say, well, that plan didn't work and this plan's better. So
And
it's
while this board does not set precedent, that's not a good look, and that's not something this board really wants to entertain. So I think we're really struggling, and what we're really trying to grapple with is what are the distinguishing situations here that we can look at this, because if there,
It feels like this board was sold a bill of goods when the initial approval went through.
we bought apples and we got oranges, and now we're being, well, oranges are okay, they're even better, all that vitamin C, and we're like, maybe, but we bought apples.
I understand that, but what we've done is we've put together 3 applications. They are voluminous. There was a lot of work that went into it, and we're trying to correct that issue. We're trying to move forward in the best way appropriately. And we do believe that to the extent that there would be an approval today, we believe that this town is getting a better developed project. And I think that that's important to realize, is that, as I said before, Mr. Gwynn is not a developer. He's a restaurateur. There was no intent to violate the decision or your ordinance. I really don't want to go there, but Mr. Glynn understood that he could rely on shared parking without relief based on a communication that he received from a staff member of this town that is no longer employed by this town. We're not making excuses. What we're saying is he earnestly believed that he was acting within the decision and the ordinance when he constructed the patio. And the moment that he was told otherwise, he stopped and he got myself and Mr. Bannon to put together the best thing we could in consultation with your zoning officer, and we presented it here this evening. So there's no doubt that the first go around didn't go the way that it would have if myself and Mr. Bannon and Mr. Glynn were here. But we've done everything we could to move forward in the appropriate way. And I'm asking the board to look at what's in front of it this evening and make a determination that the modifications that we're seeking are appropriate, and that the variances that we're seeking with respect to shared parking make a safer and better parking situation.
I will just say, I don't think there's any benefit to the town in not approving the shared parking. I don't think we're gonna get anything more beneficial by denying the shared parking and forcing him into some other situation. I just don't see that we're at a point where something better, a better outcome is gonna happen if we tell him we're denying this application.
Well, yeah, I think we'd be back to the original
Yeah.
layout, which,
Which is a mess.
yeah.
that we
I-
all acknowledge.
I agree, and what I've been grappling with is that this is not, it feels like we're getting railroaded with this, and we're not a rubber stamp board. And I gotta be honest, I'm extremely disturbed that, there was some unilateral action taken, a stop work order, and now here we are trying to pick up the pieces. And I understand, counsel, you're doing, it sounds like it's a tough situation. You're trying to do your best.
Patio. I mean, there's no permitting that was required, so please understand, it's not like something was constructed without any approvals. The NOV all comes down to the fact that the patio got placed there and the spots went away, and you're dealing with the gentleman that's a restaurateur, not a developer, that didn't have the aid of the experts and the professionals that he has today.
He should have had them in the beginning if that's the case. And like I said, we're trying to grapple with some of these issues, and I agree with what the chair is saying. it sounds like the plan, presented today is probably a better plan. But again, going back to it, this,
Yeah, but if
This
you
is-
talk
this
to
is
the town official and says, yeah, you can do it.
I wouldn't go down that,
No.
with all due respect. I
All
wouldn't
right.
go down that road.
We don't, all I'm gonna say is this. I'm a young professional. I've made mistakes in my life. And Mr. Glenn is a young professional, and there was no animus. There may have been a violation, but it was not done purposefully. And professionals make mistakes. We're here to do everything we can to fix it. And I would ask that there be a prospective view at this point with respect to what's before you.
Perhaps we should just survey the board to see where we're at with this matter. We can start with Mr. Francis, even though you're not necessarily voting, but give us your input on the two issues of the parking and the dumpster.
Regarding the parking, I think the shared parking plan makes sense. It is a better plan. As far as the dumpster goes, I think there is maybe some provisions that we can make to see whether we can honor the original design with some input from the fire marshal. So if that dumpster needs to be a certain size so that it can accommodate a roof, then so be it. Let it be that size. It doesn't have to be a giant dumpster. You're talking about a tiny cafe and a tiny little restaurant, the Wedge. So, whatever that is, that is. But I would say let the fire marshal dictate what that is. And that's it. I think the parking plan makes sense. I think it's smart.
Barrett?
I'd be happy to approve the shared parking and the dumpster as on the plans. Well, I prefer to see a roof on it. They have an agreement with Mr. Bullock. He's moved it. Sounds far enough away from his place. I think this was gonna be proper screening for the dumpster. I don't necessarily see the point of putting a roof on there. Sometimes I don't know. It's just one less step. I think this would be, for me, it's fine. I think it'll look nice from the parking area. I think it'll be nice for Mr. Bullock. So he somewhat agreed to it, so I'm ready to approve it as they wish.
Michael?
Yeah, on the dumpster part of it, again, it was kind of put upon him because he had to go to litigation on it. So it was, that was kind of a hardship on him and he decided to not fight it and just, work out a amicable agreement. The shared parking, again, like everybody else, I mean, I know that the apples and oranges, I believe, and I agree with you on that, but I think it's also a situation where, you have to do what's gonna be best for the overall, environment in the area, and that new plan does show with the environment. Maybe do have them do the stipulation on the parking, the additional parking that, they'll leave, they'll work it eminently on trying to keep those for as long as possible and maybe possibly get support.
Right, Jason Nystrom?
the dumpster, I'm fine with the location. Regarding the roof covering and all that, I am of the opinion that I think it need to be held all the same terms and conditions, basically all the same terms and conditions placed on the dumpster from the prior decision need to apply at its new location that's been proposed. Regarding the parking, I'm having some difficulty grappling with a few things, and I think I've kind of made it known. I'm not trying to say this, we went through this all before. We're happy to see the business coming in here. What I'm grappling with is that, we were sold a bill of goods, we didn't get it. And I understand all the reasons for that. Certainly I'm not infallible myself. However, I don't want this board to have an appearance that, you can just kind of throw something on another application, throw something together. You dig into it and grant an approval, and then months later, we get a revision saying, well, actually, that doesn't actually work. I've got some significant concerns about that. I've got some significant concerns about that. The fact of the matter being, though, that the proposed parking plan, shared parking agreement does seem to be a decent layout, it's a crying shame that wasn't in front of us the first time around. You know, to some degree, you know, this is an adjudicated body. You've got your shot, you got to make it, you know, and the first time around, up or down. You know, and I'm just concerned about the standards. Significantly that the hardship was not the result of any prior action of the applicant. You know, there's been some testimony taken. We had the plan. There's supposed to be 6 spots up front, and patio was put in. Those spots are gone. I've just got some concerns about that. I'm kind of, you know, you know, fortunately, it sounds like even with the offsite plan, you know, there's going to be enough spots to be taken. Although I do feel that the proposed plan is going to be better for the town in the long run. I'm having a hard time grappling with it.
Jason, right now.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think in general, the dumpster, I think, is a little bit of a non-issue. I mean, it moved because it had to move, which is perfectly understandable, and considering the fact that the option was, you know, come to a reasonable settlement with an abutter who was unhappy or spend 3 years in Superior Court wasting your money. I mean, it seems like a perfectly reasonable reality. I think I tend to agree with Mr. Nystrom that, you know, unless the fire marshal comes through and says there is a reason why it should not be a full enclosure, I don't see any reason why something closer to that direction doesn't make sense. Obviously, if the fire marshal says, well, all right, here's the extra $100,000 in sprinklers and plumbing that you need to do in order for it to be a fully enclosed space, well, then there's a reason why that wouldn't necessarily be reasonable. As far as the parking is concerned, I think to Mr. Bannon's testimony, I think we've resulted here in ultimately a safer and more efficient parking plan with less room for error. I can appreciate Mr. Nystrom's position, and I think where it settles for my mind is more of a timeline where we had 6 spots. The safety of those 6 spots were called into question because of the reality of the site, and therefore we ended up with a patio and a shared parking plan. I don't necessarily know that we were in a situation where we had 6 spots, then we had a patio, and now suddenly we have a shared parking plan that's using safety as an excuse. I could completely see, under the circumstances, I've been on countless construction sites where you sort of stand in the room and go, all right, this is not what I was expecting, so it's time to change something. So yeah, I think for me, approving the shared parking plan actually is the least of any of this. I think that makes the most sense. And I do think that, in my view, the existence of the leases that are in evidence to show that there is not only a good faith effort, but an executed effort to find additional parking to relieve the stress on this property. I think that goes a long way. And certainly there would be an expectation that those leases would be maintained going forward so that it is not simply, it looks good on paper, but it's going away next year. I think those kinds of efforts are the kinds of creative efforts that will lead to a better traffic and a better parking situation on Water Street.
Okay. So I'm very displeased by the optics of this whole thing, as I think other board members have stated. I'm also displeased by change in the design of the dumpster enclosure. However, I can concede that the dumpster concerns of Mr. Bullock and his tenant appear to have been resolved by the relocation of the dumpster. So it may no longer be as critical that the dumpster be fully enclosed with the roof. So I would begrudgingly say that I could accept the dumpster with the fenced enclosure as shown in that packet. The shared parking, I think, does make sense for this location. I think it's a better arrangement than the previous plan. I think it increases safety. And I certainly admire the effort to find even more parking, even above and beyond what would be required, and I'm not aware that any or at most very few other businesses on Water Street or anywhere in town have gone to that effort to try to alleviate congestion. So I think that's certainly something to be commended of Mr. Gwynn to make that effort. And I appreciate his creativity in, trying to incentivize his patrons to use this parking, not just, okay, he's got a lease on paper, they're there, and yeah, if the patrons know about them, fine, or he doesn't, it's not really his problem. He's made it his problem to really try to incentivize people to ensure that they do use this parking, to try to be a good neighbor, to try to respect the concerns of the people who live in that neighborhood. I think that shows his commitment to the town of Warren, that he's been here for 10+ years with his current location. And he's made a substantial investment in this property and wants to continue to be an important business in this town. So on the whole, I would be inclined, although personally I have some misgivings about the whole process, I think what is before us is in the best interest of the town. I don't think we're going to accomplish anything more beneficial by denying this. And so I will also remind the board that in order to approve this, we need a simple majority of 3 of the 5 voting members.
And I think before I take a wholehearted stab at trying
I'm going to go one piece at a time.
Well, and that's my question is if I can ask the solicitor, so. Let me get my numbers right here. 23-11 is actually a variance request for parking. Is that correct?
Correct. That's because it's required under the ordinance.
Oh, no.
Basically, somebody in the mixed, in the waterfront overlay district who requests a parking plan, it's approved via a variance.
Okay.
So they cannot use a shared parking plan unless it's approved by variance.
In that area, yes.
Right, okay, and then the other 2 are amendments to an existing decision. So what are the stated finding of facts that need to be included in the motion in order to amend that decision?
You still have to apply the standards as we normally do.
Because those were amendments to a special use.
Correct.
Right, because all those conditions about the dumpster, et cetera, this whole thing, those were all conditions attached to the original special use.
Correct.
So to modify the special use, we'd have to find that the modifications meet the criteria of the special use.
Got it. All right.
So, so I'll just ask, is there any further discussion or commentary by the board members?
None.
Mr. Chair, just so
Yes.
reluctant to do this right now, but I just want to make sure that the planning board recommended that.
Oh, yes, we're gonna acknowledge that.
It's very clear that all the parking spaces that have been allocated for this restaurant, employees cannot park there. Previously, as a condition of the prior special use permit, it was off-site. Now technically, he has off-site that is allocated for the business, just to clarify where these employees are gonna park.
Yes, we're gonna be very clear that the off-site parking for the employees was one of the original decision conditions.
Off-site, but now he has off-site for the
Sure.
restaurant.
Yes, he has off-site for patrons as well. no?
Correct, because that's actually in the lease
Yeah,
that he presented. It says for employees, patrons, etc. Just to clarify,
Yes.
everybody's on the
but
same.
the employees will still continue to park off-site per the original agreement.
That's correct. I believe that the concern of the planning board, we maintain flexibility in the lease agreements because we hadn't been before the boards yet. I think the concern was that the offsite that we obtained would be utilized for employees as opposed to patrons. And that's how I understood the concern of the planning board to be. I don't know if it's this board's concern, but I can tell you, we do not have an objection to a condition that the off-site parking with the leases be solely for customers and patrons if it pleases this board.
And that his other arrangements that he had previously made for his employee parking would still stay in effect.
Absolutely. And what the decision says is that it's got to be offsite.
So we can specifically identify that the newly obtained leases are for patron parking only, and then his remote employee parking would remain as previously represented.
No objection.
And so are you still in favor of a condition recognizing that the applicant will make a good faith effort within reasonable business terms to maintain these off-site patron spaces,
Absolutely.
but they're not tied specifically to the number of spaces that he's required to have? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
All right, anything else? So there's no further discussion. Is there a motion to be put forward first on the variance for the shared parking?
All right. Come on to your hats. I'll move approval of 23-09 Toasted Bun Holdings LLC owner and Sam Glynn, DBA Chomp Kitchen and Drinks applicant, 279 Water Street, plat map 4, lot 96. Request for a parking variance to allow less than the required on-site, off-street parking spaces under section 32-105 and to allow a shared parking agreement under section 32-151E3 in the waterfront zoning district. In approving this parking variance, we will note that the hardship is due to the unique characteristics of the subject land or structure, in so much as this lot is only so large. There is established parking on this lot, but it is shared by multiple entities, including the town, and the lot is not getting any larger. So the reality is we can either fit parking into the space or we cannot. We will further note that the hardship is not the result of any prior action by the applicant and does not result in primarily from the desire for the applicant to realize greater financial gain. There has been testimony that part of the inciting incidents necessitating these parking adjustments and site adjustments was an easement that was newly agreed upon with one of the abutting property owners. That easement was a reality based on litigation or the threat of litigation, and under the circumstances, the easement is the most reasonable path forward. As such, these parking measures have been looked at and addressed by a shared parking plan as put into evidence, which requires certain adjustments to operational hours of the 3 businesses that share this particular site. Those hours are documented in the information and evidence. So I will simply say that they are as stated on the proposed conditions site plan dated January 13th of 2023. We will further note that in approving the use of this shared parking plan, there is no small amount of goodwill and best practices shown by the applicant in securing and providing into evidence the leases for up to 14 off-site parking spaces, which will further reduce the overall parking burden on this site. We will condition this approval on the applicant making all commercially reasonable efforts to maintain those 14 off-site parking spaces for patron use only for the foreseeable future. We will further note that the granting of this requested variance will not alter the general character of the surrounding area or impair the intent or purpose of the zoning ordinance or comprehensive plan. We do recognize as a board that this is a cramped area in a very busy portion of the town, but we do believe that this shared parking arrangement and additional off-site parking is the best way forward to provide safety for both vehicular and pedestrian traffic and to relieve the parking burden on this particular site to the greatest extent possible. We will also say that the relief to be granted is the least relief necessary, and if it were not granted, it would constitute more than a mere inconvenience because unfortunately, the fallback parking arrangement, which was originally proposed for this site and by this applicant, is less safe and less workable than the plan that's been presented before us.
I would add a couple of additional findings of fact. That with regard to it not be, the hardship not being the result of the desire for greater financial gain, I think it's important to note that no increase in the seating capacity of the Chomp restaurant was requested. The applicant is staying with the previously approved 60 indoor seats and 20 outdoor seats. So the change in the parking, there's been no demonstration that is simply a result of the applicant wanting to capitalize on greater financial gain from his restaurant. I would also have the finding of fact that the suitability of the shared parking plan is based strongly on the recognized expert testimony of Mr. Bannon, who advised on the preparation of this plan and presented that it is in the best interest of both the business and the town, and will preserve safety and convenience for all those involved. Also, just add to the condition of the off-site parking for the patrons, that the applicant will continue to maintain his remote employee parking such as was originally presented when this approval was originally granted.
Maybe just clarify for that 1620.
Yeah.
We're only talking about 30 outside.
He can do whatever he wants.
That's clear, so.
Yes.
30 people outside.
Correct. He needs to have a total, but there's a total of 80 approved for the restaurant in any configuration acceptable to the fire marshal and legally appropriate. So you can spread those 80 seats however you want, so long as it's legal and safe.
Thank you.
Other specific conditions or amendments regarding the parking arrangement?
Maintenance of the leases.
Yeah, you
Yep.
said make
Yeah.
every reasonable commercial effort to maintain the leases. Any other conditions or amendments? All right, all those in favor of approving the shared parking variance? Aye. Any opposed? So the motion to approve the shared parking variance is approved 5-0 unanimous.
Yeah, the second, that's.
I don't think there was.
Oh, I think it was Mr. Alves.
Yeah. All righty,
Now moving on.
let's do another one. Application. I will move. Applicant, approval of application 23-10, Toasted Bun Holdings LLC, owner Sam Glynn, DBA Chomp Kitchen and Drinks applicant. 279 Water Street, plat map 4, lot 96. Request for an amendment to Warren Zoning Board decision dated May 25th, 2021, to allow the dumpster to be relocated to an area that is operationally functional in a waterfront zoning district. In approving this modification to the special use permit, we will note that this new dumpster location will be compatible with the neighboring land uses. This new location will be outside of an agreed upon easement with the abutting property owner and has been agreed upon with that property owner. It actually
Documents submitted in evidence.
in documents submitted in evidence. We will also note that this actually moves the dumpster location closer to the center of the property in question, moving it further away from all abutting property lines. Therefore, it will not create a nuisance or a hazard in the neighborhood. We will note that it is compatible with the comprehensive community plan in so much as this location will allow for the clearance of the easement for the abutting property and for safe transit of the removal truck that will be ultimately cleaning this dumpster on a regular basis. And as such, the community, public convenience and welfare will be served, as this dumpster will be able to be emptied on a regular basis without blocking traffic on Water Street. In approving this modification, we will note that the only thing we are allowing to be modified is the placement of the dumpster. All other conditions as included in the original special use permit will remain intact.
I'm going to object to that and urge the board not to force the dumpster to be fully enclosed. Because I think the issue for which that was intended no longer exists, that Mr. Bullock is satisfied. I appreciate that the dumpster would have been nice to have a full enclosure, but I think at this point, it is putting an undue burden for an issue that we've acknowledged no longer exists.
I'm going to second Mr. Renone's motion. From what the testimony we've heard today, it just sounded, there's been a lot of speculation as to what Mr. Bullock may or may not have wanted regarding this dumpster. Certainly it's been moved. I've got no problem with that. But I am of the position there's been no concrete evidence presented today indicating why the terms of the prior conditions need to be changed. So I second the motion that they need to be maintained. Pending all public safety, state fire regulations, yada, yada, yada.
I think out of an appreciation of brevity at this point, would we be able to straw poll to see if there are 3 votes that do not have an issue with? the
Oh,
fence?
I'm not voting against it just because of the dumpster enclosure. I'm in favor of it with Mr. Nystrom's second. It's my personal opinion that I don't think it's necessary, but I'm not going to not vote for the motion because of that.
You got two.
I'm in favor of the motion.
No, what he's saying is in favor. He's just getting.
I've given my opinion that I don't think he should be forced to do the dumpster enclosure, but I'm still gonna vote for the motion, even though it includes that. I'm not gonna not vote for it. I will begrudgingly accept that.
I would go either way as well, but I would say, this is, personally, I think this is actually better than a fully enclosed. If it's fully enclosed, it's just gonna stink and smell and have rodents and will heat up and be bad for garbage. I mean, you could do this for walls and maybe a roof, but I would not make this thing a full enclosure thing for a dumpster. I think it's even more of a fire hazard, so.
In under discussion, I feel the same way. We should amend it.
Could you,
In some ways, I think it's up to Mr. Glenn to
can I
operate as,
suggest
what?
maybe leave it up to the recommendation of the 2 options to the fire marshal, fire chief?
We could,
This way, he can make a determination whether or not full enclosure is appropriate or not appropriate. It's all about safety issues at that point.
Could be safety.
yeah, I think I would be in favor of that the 2 options are on the table for the applicant. And it has to be determined with the fire marshal and building inspector, what is the most appropriate safety approach for this.
Correct. So it will be conditioned on the recommendation of the fire marshal.
I think that sounds reasonable. I would amend my motion to note that the enclosure around the dumpster will be at the discretion of the fire marshal to determine what the appropriate and safe enclosure for that dumpster should be. All other conditions of the original special use permit shall remain intact.
May I also add, fire marshal and building official together?
Yeah,
So noted.
So just so we're clear, we're basically giving, the way this motion is phrased, basically giving 2 options, full enclosure versus the cedar fence, giving it to the fire marshal and say, which one do you think? We're not saying, hey, go for the enclosure, but if that doesn't go for something else.
Correct.
I mean, I don't think the fire marshal is gonna wanna make a decision based on whether it needs to be full or not. He's just gonna say whether there are safe options. Cause really, he doesn't care what. Whether
he
it's
might determine
fenced or not,
he
he's
might
just gonna say
determine-
whether they're safe.
that the full enclosure is not a safe option, so then that takes it off the table.
Right, but you know,
Yeah, but the way it's phrased, it's the option, it's one or the other, versus,
partially, you know.
Mr. Chair, if I may. So
I'm not trying to make a big deal about
Yeah,
this, I'm
it's
trying
just-
to.
the issue, and as you're well aware, there's an issue of combustible material.
Yes.
So my concern is that what's been presented is of combustible material. If the fire marshal, myself, through fire code and deem that this is unsafe, well, now what's been presented can't be used because it's combustible. So essentially, what's non-combustible? Concrete block, steel, So
Are you talking about the wood slat thing
Oh.
even?
around, yes, to make an enclosure around this dumpster, potentially, and I'm not, because I don't have the codes in front of me, but potentially there may be a code that says that it can not be made of combustible material.
Oh, so that even the wood slats might be off the table.
Yes, so.
So we
that's-
don't know what.
Well, I'm
kind of
talking about
enclosure.
enclosed,
to enclose.
enclosed.
Not off the table to just do it an open.
Yeah, so if we made a wood enclosed structure, potentially that's gonna be, it's a combustible structure that it may not be allowed, and I don't wanna go on record. This is just from, so the fire chief would have more on his code side. So that's what I'm getting at, that it may be deemed that the exterior can be wood as long as there's no roof, but if there needs to be a roof, it may be needed to be made out of non-combustible
So
material.
then does it make sense to have that condition be that the applicant will work with the fire marshal and the building official to determine what an appropriate enclosure for that dumpster will be?
Yes.
So
How did the initial one get approved in the first place?
it was basically an extension of the existing structure.
He was building,
It wasn't a
It wasn't
dumpster. That was.
it wasn't a dumpster per se, it was bins.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
because you're consolidating.
second it.
sites, I got you.
Okay, so
So I guess what is the way the motion's reading here?
So
the
it's,
fire marshal is gonna determine what materials are appropriate to make, that the dumpster has to be enclosed
And
with
the-
something, whether it has a roof or just sides and a roof. We're gonna have to leave that to the fire marshal to determine,
As well as the building.
and as well as the building. Huh? That we're gonna, the dumpster must have, shall we say, screening around it? Some sort of constructed
Privacy.
screening,
That's it, required.
and that what that exactly can, to what level it's enclosed will have to be determined by the fire.
in the building. And the
In the building.
All right.
Second.
Okay, all in favor of the dumpster modification to the special use? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the motion is passed 5-0 unanimously on the second piece of this, and now we're on.
Before we go to the next one, I think we need to make a motion to extend the time because it passed.
Oh, it is after 10 o'clock.
Oh, so would you like to make that official motion?
Guess so.
So what is the motion? Are we putting a specific time limit to extend the meeting, or we're going to
Do
extend?
we
the
have
meeting
another
to finish-
application after this?
Did you have
Then we're
two?
going to extend the meeting to the, it's the
There was
same
two.
app,
Okay.
so it's essentially one map, or we're gonna hear the testimony. So,
I'll make a motion to extend the meeting for another half hour, and we'll just make this
Expedient.
expedient motion.
okay, so is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so the meeting is extended for another half an hour.
Woo-hoo. So once more with feeling, I move approval of application 23-11. Toasted Bun Holdings LLC owner Sam Glynn, DBA Chomp Kitchen and Drinks applicant 279 Water Street. Plat map 4, lot 96, request for an amendment to the Warren Zoning Board decision dated November 7th, 2021 to change the hours of operation to allow for a shared parking plan with other businesses on the property in a waterfront zoning district. In approving this modification to a special use permit, we will note that it is compatible with the neighboring land uses, as the modified hours are actually more limited than those that were originally approved within the special use permit. This will not create a nuisance or a hazard in the neighborhood, as again, we will have less vehicular traffic and less customer traffic associated with this business. It will be compatible with the comprehensive community plan, as it will lessen the overall load on the site while still allowing a Warren business to operate to the fullest extent. And the public convenience and welfare will be served in so much as this business will continue to operate while allowing additional business functions on the site in a more efficient manner. I will note that the modification of the hours is to change the listed hours of Tuesday through Sunday from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. to a modified hour set of Wednesday through Saturday from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. Actually, I think that's it.
And we say they're as per whatever this document is.
Yes, this also, we will note
That
that
related, talks about the shared part.
yeah, we will note that this does, that special use permit will also be adjusted to note that that business will be relying upon the shared parking plan. As noted on the proposed conditions site plan for 279 Water Street dated January 13th of 2023 with business hours and parking allotments as noted on that plan.
And I think we'll add that the applicant will maintain signage on the site to identify the hours of use for the various parking spaces and which business customers can park in those spaces at which times.
And just to clarify, I believe you put on the record from Wednesday to Saturday. Correct.
Yes,
The
I believe
hours.
Wednesday to Saturday, 11 to 6. is
The
what's being
original
requested.
also had Tuesday from 9 to 9, so just make it clear that those days are.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Correct.
Thank you.
And we will still maintain, per the original approval, 2 spaces to be utilized for pickup business until, per the original conditions, the restaurant reached 80% of capacity or during peak hours of whatever the wording was in the original decision, that will remain in force. And then those spaces will be used for general patrons.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So this modification also passes 5-0.
Good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I very much appreciate your due diligence and preparation this evening. And I would also just like to put on the record that I very much appreciate Mr. Cabral, Mr. Ferrer's professionalism. And after the NOV was issued, and instead of getting into a dispute, finding a way forward. So they should be commended.
Thank you. It was not an easy task, but we got there in the end.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. See you later.
Without further delay, we have applications 2312 and 2313. Both Allison Newsom, owner, and W.R. Spencer Morris, the applicant. They're both located at 241 Water Street, Plat 4, Lot 45. One is an amendment to an existing special use permit to allow a mixed-use residential, that being a 3 residential unit and 1 commercial unit under section 3247 within the waterfront district. The second part of it is a request for a parking variance to allow, again, 3 residentials and 1 commercial unit per section 32105 in the waterfront zoning district. The applicant would like to come forward. Again, for the record, state your name and address, please.
Good evening, Chairman and Board. Spencer Morris, 18 Cole Street here in Warren.
We're getting some wicked feedback on that.
Maybe you can just step back.
What is it? Dueling?
Oh, yes.
You don't need to do it.
Okay.
Here we go.
All right.
Plus you probably don't need.
And Spencer, I'll apologize for the lengthy wait you've had.
That's fine. We can keep this brief.
Please.
Hopefully.
That would be great.
So give us a brief synopsis of what changes you want to make from the previous approval for this mixed-use property.
So several years ago, we came before this board to take a 4-unit commercial building and convert it to 2 residential units and 2 commercial units. That work was completed, I think, a couple of years ago, and we're now coming before the board again to take one of the last remaining commercial units and convert it into a residential unit.
And just describe briefly, what is the relief with regard to the parking due to this change?
So the parking is problematic, as we've just heard at length tonight. We're located on Water Street. The building occupies close to 85–90% of the lot. We do have one parking spot that is on the property. And we are going from a more intensive parking use to a less intensive parking use, basically going from a commercial to residential. In as much as we have full occupancy of the building, we do need relief from the specifics of the parking ordinance.
So the parking's not getting any worse than it was in the pre.
It's not getting any worse.
We have a document here from the planning board. You attended a meeting with the planning board, and they had recommendations that the residential unit will not be available for short term, meaning 30 nights or less. The unit should not be registered as a short-term residential rental under the recently adopted Chapter 4, Article 6, Division 3, Section 4-144. The Historic District Committee is to approve minor exterior changes, which it looks like they did that on February 21st. And there is a review and confirmation by the building official that the building plans meet state building code requirements. You're aware of those conditions and those are acceptable?
They're absolutely acceptable, and I'm aware of it.
Okay. Specific questions for the applicant with regard to this modification of his previously approved special use?
You had an office and you're gonna turn it into an apartment, is that what you're doing?
That's correct, yeah.
And you have 2 bathrooms indicated in the unit?
That's correct.
Okay.
A half bath and full bath.
How many bedrooms for this unit?
There's 1 bedroom.
1 bedroom?
So that, is that on the Water Street side?
It is,
Water
yeah.
Street, one of the offices.
Yeah.
Turned into a little.
Yeah. I would note that, as we're all aware, since 2020, there has been a bit of a paradigm shift in terms of work-live situations. People are working at home. So we're hoping that we'll bring in a tenant who will want to occupy this space and work at home kind of thing, which just seems to be more common. I think it'll be a suitable use for the property.
And the one remaining commercial unit will stay as is for the time?
Yeah,
being?
that's my wife's studio, and it's more than 30% of the building itself. So,
So the
And
bedroom,
we can recognize that the ordinance allows mixed-use development in this area by special use permit,
yeah.
which is why you have the special use.
Well, I think it was also the fact that it's defined in the waterfront district as second floor use for
Oh,
residents and ground floor for commercial occupancy. But we're basically a single story, so.
Yeah, but we had to modify that.
Yeah.
Restraint, since the ordinance didn't contemplate a mixed use on a single.
Yeah.
And we're not, just for the record, we're not enlarging or modifying the footprint of the building.
No, there'll be no change to the exterior other than the window treatment.
Other than the approved historic committee.
That's correct.
Sort of aesthetic
Yeah.
modifications.
so where's the bedroom gonna be located?
Excuse me?
Where is the bedroom gonna be located?
On the south side.
I guess we're in the unit, so we're just looking at the kind of like the squiggle cloud.
That's right. That's the scope of the work it's the easternmost unit in the building.
I think it's this.
So then the bedroom would be directly adjacent to the full bath?
That's correct.
And that kitchen unit, where it says like East Unit A, that's gonna remain as what I'm assuming is the kitchen.
We would be constructing a new kitchen.
Just looking at it,
Yeah.
So the office area is gonna be the bedroom or the living room?
The office area is going to be.
No, the office would stay the same. There's an unlabeled section between the 2 bedrooms that would actually become the bedroom. Sorry, between the 2 bathrooms that would become the bedroom.
Okay.
Yeah, effectively, we'll be installing a half bath and a kitchen.
Other specific questions for the applicant? Is there anyone in the public wishing to comment? Not that I can comment. So we'll bring it back to the board. Are there any final comments or additional information you'd like to receive from the applicant? Is someone prepared? First, we will act on the special use allowing this use, so 2312, we need a motion on.
Let's bang this one out. Move approval of 2312, Allison Newsom owner and W.R. Spencer Morris applicant, 241 Water Street, plat map 4, lot 45. Request to amend an existing special use permit to allow mixed-use residential, 3 residential units and 1 commercial unit under section 32-47 in the waterfront zoning district. In approving this change to the special use permit, we will note that it is compatible with the neighboring land uses, as a large portion of Water Street is residential, and under the circumstances, this will not create a nuisance or a hazard in the neighborhood, as another single-bedroom residence unit will ultimately not substantially increase the overall load on the neighborhood. It is compatible with the comprehensive community plan. Any residential development or residential unit coming on the market in Warren is always a good thing. And as such, the public convenience and welfare will be served. In making this change, we will note the memo received from the planning board, and we will condition this change to the special use permit on all 3 of the conditions as noted in that memo dated March 14th, 2023.
Are there any other conditions or amendments to this amendment to the special use permit?
No, I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? As the special use amendment is approved unanimously 5-0.
Great.
We'll go on to 2313.
And I will move approval of application 23-13, Allison Newsom owner, W.R. Spencer applicant, 241 Water Street, plat map 4, lot 45, request for a parking variance to allow 3 residential units and 1 commercial unit under section 32-105 in the waterfront zoning district. In approving this parking variance, we will note that the hardship is due to the unique characteristic of the subject land or structure. There is only 1 parking space available on the property, and the property is on Water Street. As such, no additional parking space is available. The hardship is not due to any prior action of the applicant or result from primarily a desire for the applicant to realize greater financial gain. The property is successful, it is occupied, and as such, there is simply a desire to convert what was a rentable commercial space to a rentable residential space. In granting the requested variance, it will not alter the general character of the surrounding area. Ultimately, Water Street is a densely populated area, and this 1 additional residential unit will be in complete, I want to say compliance, but compatibility with the surrounding uses around that building. And the relief to be granted is the least relief necessary, as there is no additional parking for this property available. In approving this variance, we will note that as a 2 commercial, 2 residential unit, it actually would have required 14 spaces, and now as a 3 residential and 1 commercial unit, it will require 11. There being only 1 spot available, that is a variance of 10 parking spots for the property. If this were not to be granted, it would amount to more than a mere inconvenience, as there is no other location for parking available on this property.
Any conditions or amendments? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so the parking variance passes 5-0 unanimously. Have a good evening.
We're done? Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for staying on the show.
There are no other matters. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
And seconded. All in favor?
Aye.